Mr. Speaker, Sir, I would like to speak on how Budget 2021 supports our Singapore women. The Singapore government is fully committed to the advancement of all Singapore women. In 1961, the Legislative Assembly of Singapore debated the Women's Charter and subsequently institutionalized the rights and protection of women and girls via the Women's Charter. The Women's Charter celebrates its 60th anniversary this year. We have a long-standing commitment to building a society of equal opportunities where all Singaporeans, including women, can achieve their full potential. And statistics reflect our progress. In 2019, the literacy rates for women was 96.1%, and of residents aged 25 years and above and having a university degree, 50.8% are women. As Parliamentary Secretary Rahayu Mazam earlier mentioned, in 2020, the employment rate for women was 73.2%. But we can always do more to further support and uplift the women in our midst. COVID-19 has brought challenges to women, from increasing the stress of caregiving for some to increasing financial instability or risk of violence for others. I will like to touch on how Budget 2021 builds on continuing efforts to support women and their families by 1. Supporting women in caregiving, 2. Supporting vulnerable women, and 3. Supporting women in their career aspirations. Our women often play important roles as caregivers in our families, and we want to support them in caring for their loved ones. The government is increasing its annual spending on the early childhood sector to over $2 billion per annum within the next few years. These efforts help women by giving women real choices, as they give women peace of mind should they decide to go back to work when they have a young child. To ensure accessible, affordable, and quality preschools, the government has expanded preschool capacity and are on track to reach 200,000 preschool places by 2023. Families are also now paying less for preschools. We have enhanced preschool subsidies from January 2020 and appointed more preschools on the partner operator scheme with lowered fee caps for all Singaporean children from January 2021. Taken together, this means that a Singaporean child will receive about $50,000 in government funding over 5 years when the child enrolls in the full-day childcare program with one of the anchor operators. Low and middle-income families can additionally receive up to $28,000 in means-tested childcare subsidies. Budget 2021 builds on these efforts and goes further. We know that caregivers with young children with developmental needs may find it even more challenging to care for their children. We have thus announced that in Budget 2021, we are stepping up efforts to better support young children with developmental needs. The government currently provides government-funded early intervention or EI services to about 5,600 children below age 7 with developmental needs. Of these, 1,900 children are served in the Developmental Support, Learning Support or DSLS and Development Support Plus or DS Plus programs delivered in preschools, while 3,700 children are served in the Early Intervention Program for Infants and Children or EPIC, delivered in EI centres. Currently, about 75% of children aged 3 to 6 years old who attend EPIC provided at EI centres also attend preschools. These dual schoolers shuttle between the preschool and EI centre 2 to 3 times a week. I co-chair the Inclusive Preschool Work Group, and the work group has engaged about 900 participants, including parents, on their views regarding inclusion and support for children with developmental needs. In an online survey, parents and caregivers, the majority being mothers, rated travelling time between preschools and EI centres as being among their top 3 concerns. The caregivers shared with us the strain of having to shuttle their children between the preschool and the EI centre multiple times a week, and their concern being their children's development when they are in preschool. We have thus announced that in Budget 2021 that we are piloting a new inclusive support program, or INSP, where there will be in-school support for children who require up to medium levels of EI support. This will allow the children to meaningfully participate alongside their typically developing peers and reduce caregiving burden and stress, which arise when shuttling their children between the two centres. Typically developing children and their families will also benefit from enhanced teacher training and development of stronger social skills from a young age. The INSP pilot will be launched at a few selected preschools, and if successful, we hope to expand the INSP to more preschools and lighten the load for mothers who care for children with developmental needs. For caregivers of persons with disabilities, or PWDs, the Enabling Master Plan 3 has highlighted the need to improve caregivers' well-being and enhance their caregiving capabilities, including by creating more peer support and informal support networks. We have thus introduced the SG Together Alliance for Action, or SG Together AFA, on caregivers of persons with disabilities. Through this, NCSS and SG Enable will work with the community to tackle the pressing issue of supporting caregivers of persons with disabilities. For a start, the SG Together AFA on caregivers of persons with disabilities will focus on self-help and mutual support. SG Enable will identify stakeholders who have common interests in peer mentorship and other informal forms of informal support and shape and coordinate their efforts. If successful, a similar approach can be adopted to support other caregivers as well. Next, I would like to touch on supporting women who may be more vulnerable. COVID-19 has brought many challenges to families with incomes and lifestyles impacted, all of which can lead to conflict within the families and, in some serious cases, family violence. MSF's Adult and Child Protective Services saw a 40% increase in the number of average monthly inquiries between January and October 2020 as compared to the same period in 2019. Though not all inquiries are related to family violence and they include repeat calls by the same individuals or multiple callers reporting the same incidents, we have to keep a close watch on these trends. The launch of the National Anti-Violence Helpline, or NAVH, a few days ago is a reflection of government and community partnership in tackling family violence together. The NAVH is the first integrated helpline for the reporting of family violence and other forms of violence, abuse, and neglect. The NAVH operates 24/7 all year round to make it easier for victims of violence and abuse, members of the public, and professionals to seek help. The Task Force on Family Violence that I co-chair with MOS Associate Professor Mohammed Faisal has also studied the landscape and possible causes of family violence, and we will be putting up recommendations to the Minister of Home Affairs and Law and the Minister of Social and Family Development. The Conversations on Singapore Women's Development was launched in September 2020 to take a comprehensive look at issues that impact women at home, workplaces, schools, and the community. Participants in the conversations have raised the issue of what the approach to punishment should be for sexual and hurt offences. The Ministry of Home Affairs and Ministry of Law have reviewed the sentencing framework for hurt and sexual offences, and a ministerial statement will be made at a later date. We are cognizant of the fact that regardless the progress that Singapore women have made on many fronts, we must continue to guarantee the protection and well-being of our women and girls. COVID-19 has also impacted the incomes of women, and we have introduced various forms of assistance to help those who need help over this difficult period. In 2020, we introduced the Temporary Relief Fund and the COVID-19 Support Grant to tide Singaporeans through the financial impact of COVID-19. Given COVID-19's protracted economic impact, in January 2021, we launched the COVID-19 Recovery Grant. All in all, about 210,000 of our working women have benefited from financial support through these schemes. a budget measure may thus not be explicitly targeted at women, but it is no less impactful and meaningful for them. And as announced by DP Hem Heng in the budget statement, we will be introducing a household support package, or HSP, in order to provide additional support for families during this time of economic uncertainty. Lower to middle income families will receive more, and this includes women who lack family support, such as elderly females who live alone. Even as we support our women on their needs and guarantee their protection and well-being, we also want to support them in achieving their aspirations. Many women and men, during the conversations on Singapore women's development, have shared feedback on how women can be supported in the workplace and their career aspirations, such as having more women in corporate leadership positions and putting in place formal and informal mentorship and networking platforms for women leaders to support and learn from each other. The Council for Board Diversity, or CBD, is one such platform set up by the MSF to look into having more women on boards. The CBD promotes sustained increases in the number of women on boards of SGX-listed companies, statutory boards, and institutions of public character, or IPCs, by encouraging organizations to be more diverse and proactively identifying and grooming potential board-ready women. Our women leaders play key roles in our IPCs as leaders or board members, and our IPCs have stepped up their support during the COVID-19 period. The government is strongly supporting such efforts through various Budget 2021 initiatives, such as the extension of tax deductions for donations to IPCs. Mr. Speaker, Sir, in Mandarin, please. 新加坡政府致力于提高所有新加坡女性的地位。1961年，立法议会就妇女宪章展开辩论，并通过妇女宪章法令，以保护妇女和女童的权利。今年我们庆祝妇女宪章立法60周年，但时代的变迁也带来了新的挑战，我们必须继续努力，确保女性的进步。冠病疫情给一些家庭带来了很大的压力，在一些极端的情况下，甚至导致对女性的家庭暴力。我与内政政务部长费绍尔共同主持的防止家庭暴力工作小组，将对如何进一步提高人们对家庭暴力和求助渠道的认识提出建议，并完善程序，以确保受害者获得及时和有效的帮助，并检讨对施暴者采取的干预措施。我们也关注女性受到性骚扰、伤害和犯罪问题。内政部和律政部已在检讨判刑框架，并会发表部长声明。冠病疫情对女性和她们的生计也造成了很大的影响。通过短期援助基金、冠病疫情薪金补贴以及刚推出的冠病疫情复苏津贴计划，约21万名在职女性在这段艰难的时期获得了经济援助。正如王瑞杰副总理在财政预算案声明中所宣布的，我们将推出一系列的家庭援助配套，而中低收入家庭将获得更多的援助。这也将让那些经济能力有限和缺乏家庭支持的独居年长女性受惠。有孩子或有看护责任的女性也将从包容性辅助计划获得更多的支持。这项计划为有中等发展需要的孩子提供托儿中心的支持，减轻他们的看护负担。2021年财政预算案建立在过去支持女性以及家庭的政策上，我们希望与各方携手合作，打造一个公平和包容的社会，让女性获得支持，帮助她们达到发挥最大的潜能。In closing, the budget will continue to support our women in the roles they play and provide support for those who need it. We have dedicated 2021 as the year of celebrating SG women, and I hope you will join us in celebrating the different roles our women play in our family, for our economy, and in our society. Mr. Speaker, sir, I stand in support of the budget. Thank you.
Zinispo.
Thank you, Speaker, sir. I stand in support of the budget. Mr. Pritam Singh, the Honourable Member of Parliament, Mr. Pritam Singh, asked about the CDC voucher scheme and the role of CDCs and mayors. I'm one of the mayors and representing the mayors now. Let me start with the CDC voucher scheme. The CDC voucher scheme was conceived for two purposes. One, to help Singapore households defray the cost of living, and two, to support local businesses, especially those in the heartlands, supporting two target groups affected by the COVID pandemic, residents and heartland businesses. Now, the first tranche of 20 million was rolled out last year to lower and middle income households, to much success. So with that good support, the CDCs recently rolled out in January another $20 million of CDC vouchers, what we call tranche 2, January this year. More than 7,000 merchants have participated in the scheme, and there was good feedback. And the scheme went beyond the neighborhood mom and pop shops that was suggested by Workers' Party's Mr. Peng Eng Huat. In fact, the range of shops covered smaller supermarkets, the coffee shops, wet and dry market stalls, confectionaries, bakeries, medicine shops, hair salons, and so on. So Mr. Singh should have found out that NTUC FairPrice, Sheng Siong, and Giant were not included right from the start. The function of the CDCs in the voucher scheme is clear. From scratch, the teams organized the resources, communicated the scheme, and got as much merchants as possible to sign up and to make full use of this well-intended help scheme. Unlike what Mr. Singh mentioned, local bodies like the grassroots CCC or the consultative citizen committees, the grassroots, do not always have market and shop representatives sitting in their committees. Instead, merchant and hawker associations are reached by tapping on a network that's organized by the CDCs that comprise CDC and CC staff, contract staff, grassroots volunteers, and national bodies such as the Singapore Federation of Merchants Associations and its subsidiary, the Heartlands Enterprise Singapore. So Mr. Singh's suggestion to have the CCCs or grassroots volunteer run this multi-million help scheme is either ignorant of or insensitive to the reality on the ground. Grassroots CCCs are not set up to run schemes of this magnitude. In the last year, in fact, many grassroots volunteers were quietly helping in the massive distribution of sanitizers, free meals, millions of face masks, and the Trace Together tokens. Even today, they're knocking on doors to encourage residents to go for their vaccinations, to get the herd immunity that Singapore would need to keep us safe from COVID-19. In any case, the CCCs or the grassroots are not set up to organize schemes such as the CDC voucher scheme. And finally, sir, back to some of the questions that Mr. Singh has brought up, to the operation of the next tranche of the $150 million worth of CDC vouchers. This third tranche is intended to do, of course, to help the residents and the heartland businesses as well, but it's also intended by DPM and Ministry of Finance to thank everyone for their support during the COVID period and also to celebrate hawker culture. The tranche is now more than 7 times the initial 2 exercises, due to one key reason. DPM Heng and his team had listened and decided that the vouchers would be extended to every Singaporean household, regardless of public or private dwelling. And the CDCs are still working on the processes, the cost, and the time frame of the scheme. Details will be announced once they're ready. I hope that heartland merchants from all the constituencies of members of parliament of this house, including Hougang, Aljunied, and Sengkang GRCs, will join the CDC voucher scheme so that both merchants and more residents will benefit from it. Next, I wish to speak on the role of CDCs and mayors. The idea of the CDCs was first mooted by the then Prime Minister Goh Chok Tong in 1996 as part of his vision of a tightly knit, compassionate, and self-reliant community in Singapore, with the more able in society helping the less able. Unlike government ministries, which have very focused functions and missions, CDCs are geographic, district-based entities that is another way to serve citizens who need help. The key mission is to assist, bond, and connect. For many years, the CDCs focused primarily on assisting and are known mostly to the lower income households for administering, because they administer the government's financial assistance scheme. This administration has since been taken over by the Ministry of Social and Family Development's Social Service Officers. Now, although the SSOs are now administering the financial assistance schemes, CDCs continue to assist in different ways. At the district level, CDCs perform duties that grassroots or government ministries are not quite set up to do. Effectively, three functions: the A, the B, and the C. A, aggregating the needs and resources, distributing resources at district level. B, to build capability for our residents at the district level. And third, to connect all the players who are willing to help in the community. A, B, and C. On the work of the CDCs, as I said, the CDCs operate at the district level and continue to be called upon to support national initiatives such as the CDC voucher scheme I've mentioned. We also do other things, support other national initiatives. For instance, many of us, our mayors, are very in support of the lifelong learning culture and the Skills Future movement of Singapore. In fact, a total of 4,819 free Skills Future advice workshops run by the 5 CDCs had reached more than 127,000 participants in the last 3 years. During COVID-19, the 5 CDCs quickly acquired online capabilities and aggregated resources from government agencies and non-government, such as the MOE's Skills Future Singapore, SFS, and the MO Ministry of Manpower's WSG, NTUC's E2I, the Institution of Higher Learnings, and private training companies as well. This network, assembled by the CDC, helped residents navigate the Skills Future landscape for them to stay relevant and find jobs during the pandemic. In fact, in 1 week last year, the partners managed to reach out and connected over 250,000 viewers online, and more than 6,000 of them joined in the online Skills Future workshops. So that's one of the examples where the CDC support national initiatives. CDCs work at the district level, complementing the work of the grassroots, the government ministries, but more importantly, they are active in the non-grassroots space. The CDCs keep in regular touch with non-grassroots players, such as the district's business and corporate community, the social service agencies, the schools, and the institutions of higher learning, to name some. With these networks, the 5 CDCs were able to quickly roll out during the pandemic between February and October 2020, close to 70 local district initiatives that served over 676,000 beneficiaries. A recent example is the CDC student meals. Within 10 days of the circuit breaker, the mayors received ground feedback that vulnerable students who used to go to the school and receive free meals in school might not be able to afford meals or might be deprived of free meals during the circuit breaker. We sprung into action with a lot of help from the community. We garnered support from corporate partner Grab Singapore, raised funds from a philanthropist introduced by a corporate friend, and put in place an initiative to give out e-food vouchers to students in rental flats. The agility and the ability to garner resources is one of the CDC's uniqueness, because we're not part of the big ministry and we are on the ground with a small team, but that's how we remain agile. And over the years, the CDCs have also championed the culture of giving back to society. We have regular platforms to foster the spirit of giving by individual volunteers, individual donors, businesses, and other partners, either for existing programs or new ones co-created with our partners. Donors such as Far East Organization, United Overseas Bank, StarHub, Maybank, Nghi An Kong Si, and Quang Minh San temples are but some of the donors that the CDCs were able to approach for our district's residents. Last year, the CDCs drew on their networks to raise $12.3 million in cash and in kind. The value of the CDC structure, although within the People's Association, is its relative agility and ability to respond and to develop programs in the district faster than a bigger government ministry. We have developed programs through innovative solutioning and collaborations with partners to better serve target residents. Some of the signature district programs include, let me name just a few on behalf of my fellow mayors, Northwest CDC's Club 100, which has close to 800 regular donors, collectively contributing $1 million a year towards the Northwest Food Aid Program, which benefits low-income households in the 19 divisions. Southeast CDC's famous Walk for Rice at Southeast, in which rice and oats are donated to the district's vulnerable families for every 300 meters that participants walk or run. Southwest, under Yen Ling, Southwest CDC's Adopt at Southwest leads more than 100 corporate and community partners to uplift the vulnerable in social wellness, healthcare, home safety, education, and enrichment. Northeast CDC's Project Refresh, led by Mayor Desmond Chu, which supports more than 10 volunteer agencies and have refurbished close to 400 households, activating close to 3,500 corporate volunteers. For Central Singapore District, my CDC, with which of course I'm most familiar, let me just name a few. There are 52 actually in the suite of programs we have. Let me name a few. One, the Ready for School checks, vouchers donated by Far East Organization to relieve cost of starting school for 12,000 students in the rental households. The Holiday Digital Boot Camps, sponsored by United Overseas Bank for 2,000 students, so that they would not be overly affected or left behind by any digital divide. Pan-district projects like the Purple Parade, and I thank members of Parliament who have joined in this parade, which is supported by all 5 mayors and CDCs. Speaker is always supporting as well. Thank you so much. The Purple Parade is Singapore's largest movement to support inclusion and to celebrate the abilities of persons with disability. The disability cause has been supported by Central Singapore CDC since 2013 and is one of its signature initiatives. Perhaps still unknown to some, but many of the participants are not people with disabilities. They are people who believe in the cause, and they joined us. The Purple Parade reached out to over 10,000 participants annually and connected over 200 corporate and community partners, multinationals like Apple, HP, and so forth, local state boards like BCA, Building Construction Authority, Land Transport Authority, MSF, MOE, small, medium enterprises, large local enterprises, schools, and more than 40 disability organizations every year. And we have just a small team to work on this. And how we did this was with so many partners. The COVID-19 pandemic did not stop the Purple Parade, and it went online for the first time last year and continued to receive very encouraging support, again made possible by the strong network cultivated by the CDCs over the years. I've been an active volunteer in the disability sector, but I don't think I can pull off the Purple Parade without the support of the CDC and my fellow mayors. I'm not even certain that there will be a Purple Parade if not for the CDC. So I can take another budget day to share what the CDCs do. Mr. Singh's accusation that the government is trying to find some way for the CDCs to be relevant by asking them to manage the CDC voucher scheme is belittling the CDCs and our partners. There is nothing to be ashamed about making sure one is always relevant and can add value, as times change especially. When Prime Minister Lee graciously created the role of the leader of the opposition, much to Mr. Singh's surprise himself, did Mr. Singh not accept the role when he was asked, and the office and the research assistant and the salary, and try to do his best to be relevant too? Singaporeans also ask what the role of the leader of opposition in our parliament is, under the circumstances that all 9 of the elected opposition MPs are all from one single party. What has been different? Nonetheless, I want to still thank Mr. Pritam Singh for bringing up the subject of CDCs. His comment on the CDC's relative absence in the public mindshare has also given us some food for thought. Perhaps the biggest mistake the CDCs made, was not to have better publicized the work that we do. But the real work is in the work. How much publicity does one have to put out just to justify one's existence and to prove one's value add? The real work is in the work and the people we benefited. So I hope there are no attempts to politicize the good work of the CDCs and especially our partners. Would Singapore society be worse off or better off without the CDCs? Sir, this is a question that's best answered by the beneficiaries of the work done by the CDC. Sir, I support the budget.
Mr. Pritam Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Honourable Member, Ms. Denise Phua. I expected a robust response to my speech, and indeed, Ms. Denise Phua's comments are not surprising. Let me start with a very straightforward preamble. When I called for a review of whether mayors should be full-time, this wasn't a personal sort of vendetta against the current mayors or mayors who have been full-time mayors in the CDCs before. Neither was it an indictment against the programs that are run by the CDCs. But having said that, it is helpful for us to take a look back at the evolution of the CDCs. I think Ms. Denise Phua tried to do that, but I don't think she provided a complete picture. And I would attempt to do so. When the CDCs were first formed in 96, 97, the mayors were not full-time, they were part-time. They became full-time appointments, to my understanding, after the elections in 2001. And that's because the trajectory of the government thinking at that time was government programs, Comcare assistance, key fast things which are done by MOE today would go through the CDCs. Selection of where childcare offices or childcare centers would be also came through the CDCs, I beg your pardon. The budget of the CDC was increased, and it's helpful to look at the Hansard in that era. COS 2002, budget of the CDCs was increased from $19 million in 1997 to $153 million in 2001. So you find this evolution of the CDCs, I think, best encapsulated when Minister Vivian Balakrishnan was Minister MCYS, I believe. 2010 or thereabouts, Minister says all government schemes go through the CDCs on the Hansard in Parliament. Is that the case today? A lot of roles have devolved. Comcare is primarily handled by the SSOs. Many other functions are now not in the hands of the CCCs anymore, and concomitantly, the budget of the CDCs has reduced significantly. So I think the question which Member Denise Phua did not answer is it still viable for mayors to be full-time? I'd like to hear her reply to that.
I have to say that I'm probably the only full-time mayor, and that's, I think, because the Prime Minister feels that I'm running the largest district here, 23 divisions. My fellow mayors are all double-hatting or triple-hatting sometimes, and so I don't know whether you consider them full-time mayors or not, but I do know that they only get one pay, and so I think that's the current situation. So I don't know whether you consider them full-time or part-time, but I'm probably guilty of being the only full-time mayor, and I take it that that's why I do some national initiative projects as well.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Poet.
And other mayors, please feel free to speak up.
Yes. it'll be helpful to hear from them. I think my question is certainly put out there already. It's for the government now to determine whether the approach that they want to take in terms of whether a mayor should be a full-time or a part-time appointment, given the comments I've made about the scope of responsibility is something that the government wants to take forward. I've made my point, and I think it's now really in the government's hands. I would like to make a point about this issue that Honourable Member Denise Pua made about public mindshare. This has been a problem, in my view, for the longest time. It's not just something recently that has cropped up. I'll quote the Hansard. This is again 2002 COS. Mayor Zainal Abidin Rashid, my predecessor in my constituency of Eunos. He was the mayor of Northeast CDC. And this is his verbatim remarks at that debate. Recently, Radio 93.8 started a series of programs where they interviewed mayors and staff of the CDCs to explain and to talk about the CDCs. To my surprise, most of those who were interviewed by Radio 93.8 claimed that they were not aware of what the CDC was all about, and they did not even know who their mayors were, despite the fact that we have carried out quite a number of activities, unquote. And of course, it goes on. I think the point here is nobody is questioning the projects that the CDC runs. The question is it ostensibly possible that these projects also could be carried out with charities, some of whom have a huge footprint, not dissimilar to very worthy initiatives that Member Denise Pua herself helms, like Purple Parade. So I think there is a very valid question as to the roles and functions of the CDCs. And beyond the points that I've made in my speech, I thank Member Denise Pua for her clarifications.
Ms. Carrie Tan.
Hi, I would just like to share my inputs to address Mr. Singh's last question about whether the work can be undertaken by charities. Coming from being the founder of charity, I think the capacity amongst the charity sector is limited. And charities want, as far as I know from my experience, many of charities want to focus their manpower and resourcing on the work of working, hand-holding, serving, supporting families. And I think, at least from my experience, the value of the CDCs to the charity sector has been that it is able to carry out the work of consolidating, aggregating, reaching out to partners to pool more resources and support for the charities and the work that they do as well. So this is the part that I find that as a charity member in society, we do benefit greatly from the CDC's amalgamation of resources to bigger corporations who are willing to give to the sector but would like to be part of a bigger movement that then disseminates these resources out to the various charities who want to focus their resources on doing the work of supporting the communities directly. Thank you.
Mr. Jerogam.
Mr. Speaker, in line with the theme of the budget statement, I would like to examine 4 areas in which we can work together towards emerging in a stronger condition than we were in before the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. First, I wish to address how we view and approach competition. Competition is a ubiquitous aspect of life in Singapore. In school, our children compete for grades, awards, and places in top schools. Even in co-curricular activities, they compete for a spot on the school team to improve their chances of entering secondary school via the direct school admission scheme. We even grew a billion-dollar industry in the form of tuition centers, which have fueled the competitive dynamic that is part of our education system. Keen competition continues after finishing school. Employees compete with each other for raises and promotions, while enterprises engage in the survival of the fittest. Competition in itself is not bad. It can draw out the best in each person and each firm. However, when competition starts taking a negative edge, we need to re-examine our priorities. As we are told time and again, Singapore is a small and vulnerable country, which needs to stay relevant and competitive. Therefore, we must ensure that our competitive spirits are directed towards the right targets and adopt a more cooperative mindset with our fellow Singaporeans. For example, Singaporeans at the workplace could orient themselves more towards looking out for each other and helping each other succeed. This is how professionals and workers from other countries instinctively operate, even when they are working here. We should not see our fellow Singaporeans as competition for promotions, but as partners we can cooperate with to improve the products and services of our companies, thereby improving our company's earnings and contributing to our bonuses. Government-linked companies, or GLCs, could look at more ways to collaborate with SMEs in ventures overseas and form local consortiums with them, thus increasing Singapore's competitive edge. Mr. Speaker, the pandemic support measures have helped many low-income families. However, we must not forget the plight of the middle income, who make up a growing proportion of our population. Middle-income families often find themselves squeezed from both ends. Their incomes render them ineligible for many government benefits, yet they still have to cope with high costs like their home mortgage, children's education, and aged parents' medical fees. The increase in petrol duties adds to this squeeze, and so will the future hike in GST. All this leaves them with little buffer against the vicissitudes of life. An unexpected shock, like a family medical emergency, can throw them into financial distress. We need to provide more help to this group. To be clear, I'm not calling for universal handouts. Assistance should still be targeted, but I hope to see more flexibility when it comes to assessing the eligibility of applicants for schemes like the COVID-19 Recovery Grant. Individuals who narrowly miss the eligibility requirements or have circumstances that deserve special consideration should not be denied assistance. Such flexibility should be exercised at the first instance, based on their merits. The government agencies should not wait for these individuals to pluck up the courage to send in appeals before they can get the help they need. The COVID-19 pandemic has forced us all to re-examine what constitutes an essential job. Some supposedly higher skilled jobs have turned out to be less critical than their lower skilled counterparts. This was amply demonstrated during the just concluded Australian Open tennis tournament, which was held in Melbourne under the shadow of the pandemic. To minimize the spread of viruses, all human line judges were replaced with Hawkeye, an electronic line judging system. Umpires are still featured, but their role seems to be relegated to calling the score, not adjudicating line disputes. It remains to be seen when they too will be made redundant. On the bright side, ball kids face far brighter prospects, since it's harder to build a robot which can run, retrieve, and throw balls on cue. Naturally, to gear up my kids to be future ready, I signed them up to be ball kids at the ATP 250 Singapore Tennis Open, which is taking place this week in the Singapore Sports Hub. This tournament also uses electronic line judges. Automation is by no means limited to the tennis court. Many other highly skilled jobs are either being taken over by machines or offshored to lower cost locations. According to the OECD, 14% of jobs in rich countries are highly automatable, while a further 32% are likely to change because many of their routine tasks can be automated. Robo-advisors are giving active fund managers a run for their money. X-rays can be read by radiologists in India, and mobile app development can be outsourced to developers in Vietnam and Romania. The pandemic has showed us that many so-called 3D jobs, dirty, dangerous, or difficult, have turned out to be more essential than some white-collar jobs. We need to accord sufficient recognition to workers manning these positions. I'm glad that nurses and healthcare workers are getting a much-deserved raise. But let us not forget our repairmen, refuse collectors, and delivery drivers. These everyday heroes kept our country running when we were all locked down at home. I understand that even here in Parliament House, workers were here until late last night to fix a broken toilet pipe. With the restrictions in supply of foreign workers and the reluctance of many locals to take up 3D jobs, the demand for workers in these occupations often exceeds their supply. Based on the law of supply and demand, these workers' wages should naturally rise to reach a higher equilibrium price. In practice, however, many of their wages still remain painfully low. This is in part because of the structure of our industries, and in part because our society does not esteem them highly enough. This is a market failure. The state needs to intervene to ensure that these workers' earnings increase to match the value they bring to society. In 2012, the government introduced the Progressive Wage Model, or PWM, to raise the wages of low-wage workers. Today, almost a decade later, the PWM still covers only 15% of workers in the lowest quintile of income earners, and only from 3 industry sectors: security, cleaning, and landscaping. According to the MOM, there are a residual 100,000 workers in other sectors who still earn less than $1,300 a month. The NTUC has announced plans to roll out the PWM to 6 more sectors. It is yet unclear how and when all these 100,000 workers will be covered. The Deputy Prime Minister said in his budget statement that the government's aspiration is for every sector of the economy to have some form of progressive wages, echoing the NTUC's call for a universal PWM. Senior Minister Tharman Shanmugaratnam has termed the PWM a minimum wage plus. It is not my objective today to debate the merits or demerits of the PWM vis-à-vis the national minimum wage. I think the parties have stated their position on this issue. The WP has called for a national minimum wage set at $1,300, first set at $1,300 in take-home pay per month, and the government and NTUC have explained why they have chosen the path of the PWM, while pointing out that they are not ideologically opposed to the minimum wage. I accept that the government is heavily invested in the PWM, so my goal today is to discuss how the PWM framework can be improved so that we can achieve our common goal. Whether Singapore adopts the PWM, a universal PWM, a national minimum wage, a minimum wage plus, I believe the common goal of everyone in this House is the same: to raise the wages of all our low-wage workers and ensure they earn a living wage that can support their families in what is one of the most expensive cities in the world. A household budget study by researchers from NTU and NUS in 2019 found that to meet basic standards of living in Singapore, a single elderly household needs $1,379 per month, while an elderly couple needs $2,351 per month. According to the MTI, the average household expenditure for basic needs, or AHEBN, for a 4-person household was estimated to be about $1,300 a month in 2017. AHEBN is an estimate of the average that households spend on essential needs such as food, clothing, shelter every month. This is how the WP derived our figure for a national minimum wage, which will rise with the AHEBN. However, the PWM's goals are not limited to setting a basic minimum wage. This is something which the government has emphasized as the very reason why it favors the PWM over a national minimum wage. The PWM also seeks to chart out skills ladders and career progression for workers. NTUC Deputy Secretary General Kopo Kun shared plans to roll out the PWM to 6 more sectors in the next 2 to 3 years. These sectors include strata management and solar technology, both of which do not typically employ low-wage workers. I find this rather puzzling. Why are we venturing into PWM for these industries when there are still so many more low-wage workers who lack a basic wage floor to protect them? The basic principle of the PWM is that higher wages must be a result of improvements in productivity, not government fiat. Higher productivity can be achieved by upgrading workers' skills through training. With a better skilled and more productive workforce, firms will be able to pay their workers better while still remaining profitable. This sounds great in theory, but is less straightforward in practice. First, the training element of the PWM may be well-intentioned, but training can improve productivity only to a limit. In many low-wage occupations, there is a skill ceiling due to the manual nature of their work. How many more HDB blocks can a conservancy worker sweep if we send him for more training? After completing basic training, further training will reap diminishing returns. Worse, it could cost the firms money and lost work hours, with marginal or no improvements in productivity. Even if the government subsidizes much of the training and absentee payroll, it does not mean the training is free, because it is still borne by taxpayers. Second, providing pathways for career progression for our low-wage workers is also a worthy goal to strive for. However, it has limited utility for many low-wage workers. How many elderly cleaners are striving to be promoted to supervisors, where they have to manage a team and churn out monthly reports for management? For most of them, their priority is first and foremost to earn enough to provide for their families. And third, the PWM is designed to be rolled out to specific industries through licensing conditions set by the respective lead sector agencies, NEA for the cleaning sector, PLRD for security agencies, and NParks for the landscaping industry. These lead sector agencies require that firms implement the PWM before they are issued operating licenses. If an industry does not currently have licensing conditions, the relevant lead sector agency will need to introduce a licensing requirement before implementing the PWM. This will be the case for the proposed rollout of the PWM to the retail sector, which currently has no licensing requirements. This two-step process will be cumbersome for both the government agencies and the firms involved. It will surely introduce more red tape and dent productivity, leading to more overheads to firms, which may cost them more than just what a wage hike may cost them. It may cost them far more than just a wage hike to meet the basic minimum wage. I'm glad to hear that the NTUC is looking at a vocational PWM, and I look forward to more details of how this will be implemented. Someone on Reddit once remarked that the PWM is like a Rube Goldberg machine, which tries to solve too many things at once without solving anything well. This may be a rather harsh critique of the PWM, and I know that there are many officials who are working very hard to make the PWM work. However, I believe there needs to be a fundamental reordering of the PWM framework so that it can be rolled out faster for the benefit of our low-wage workers. The current pace of rollout of the PWM is much too slow. At this rate, it will be another decade or more before all low-wage workers are on the PWM. What's more, we have only to date picked the low-hanging fruit. It will be far harder to roll out the PWM, particularly in its current form, to the remaining industries and occupations. I believe it will be less bureaucratically complex and more efficient to first set a basic wage floor for specific industry sectors and expand the list of sectors quickly so that we can eventually cover all our local workers. The other aspects of the PWM, like the training requirements and career progression ladders, can still be brought in, but later. Given the urgency of the problem that remains to be addressed, 100,000 employed and self-employed workers earning less than $1,300 a month, we need to pick our battles more carefully and focus on what will move the needle the most and the quickest for our low-wage workers. Since the PWM is a minimum wage plus, we should focus on implementing the minimum wage portion of the PWM across all industry sectors as soon as possible, then roll out the plus portion only later where practical. I acknowledge that the pandemic period is not a good time to impose wage increases across a large swath of industries. To ease the transition for all employers, the workfare income supplement can be used to temporarily top up wages to the minimum wage, and these can be eased off as the economy recovers, with employers taking over. Dr. Koh Poo Kun said yesterday that the wage credit scheme could be used for this same purpose. Mr. Speaker, Rolling out a basic wage floor more widely and quickly will not only improve the welfare of thousands of our lowest paid compatriots and their families, it can also have positive effects on our economic recovery. The lower income have a higher marginal propensity to spend because they need to meet their basic needs. So putting more cash in their hands will have a multiplier effect on our GDP growth. Higher wages for these occupations will encourage more people to enter the workforce and ease the labor crunch in many essential industries. Those already in the workforce will be more motivated at work, resulting in improved personal productivity and lower turnover and retraining costs for companies. It will be a win-win-win for employers, workers, and our economy. Mr. Speaker, Madam Deputy Speaker, our people have demonstrated great resilience during this pandemic. However, in order to emerge stronger together from this economic downturn, we need to jettison some legacies that have lost their relevance in today's world and be willing to adopt new paradigms to bring our country forward. Madam, I support the budget. I support the motion.
Mr. Yip Hong Wing.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank the DPM for a compassionate, yet pragmatic and visionary budget. Allow me to focus on two pillars of our nation, our seniors and the construction industry. First, our seniors. Among those whose jobs are affected by the pandemic, our seniors are amongst the hardest hit group. I'm glad to note that this budget continues to recognize the importance of promoting senior employability. More than 200 million will be allocated for the Senior Worker Early Adopter Grant and the Part-Time Re-Employment Grant. There will be increased funding to redesign jobs and leverage on technology to develop senior-friendly workplaces. This comes on top of raising the retirement age and re-employment age to 63 and 69 respectively from July 2022. All this is good news for older workers who wish to continue in employment. While technology and financial incentives go a long way to encourage companies to employ seniors, a change in mindset of both employees and employers is required to create truly senior-conducive workplaces. Research consistently indicates bias against older workers in Singapore, with impaired health and reduced cognitive abilities among top concerns. This negative labeling of seniors can impact their employability. Concerns about employing seniors can be overcome by redesigning jobs and the physical workplace. But this is something that companies find cumbersome to do. One employer asked me, why review my workplace practices and design when I can simply hire someone younger? With this mindset, employers would miss out on the wealth of experience and problem-solving capabilities of older workers. We are an aging society. Workplaces must adapt or we'll face a labor crunch soon. Seniors must at the same time continue to be willing to adapt and persevere despite the challenges that they may face at work. It's not uncommon for seniors who, despite trying their best, remain self-deprecating of their potential and mistakenly believe that technology is for the young. Fear of the uncertainty is part of human instincts. But senior workers too must be optimistic and believe in themselves. We must continue our efforts to push for greater digital adoption amongst our seniors. Madam Deputy Speaker, I agree with DPM that we need to continue with the Job Support Scheme, or JSS, for the time being. This is because the withdrawal of the JSS will lead to increased unemployment in the near term. This will likely need assistance and matching from the government to help workers, especially senior workers, to stay in their jobs. Another major way to help on the employability front is to facilitate the creation of more micro-jobs for seniors. Member Henry Quek also spoke about this yesterday. I want to emphasize that many of these jobs can be in the community, including carers for other older, more frail seniors, medical escorts to accompany other seniors from hospital to home and vice versa, and handyman works for repairs around the estate. For instance, I see many senior residents at my MPS who have expressed interest to look for micro-jobs near their homes because they have family commitments and cannot afford to travel far. For instance, Mrs. Tan, a 63-year-old homemaker, has approached me to help her look for employment as she can spare a few hours when her grandchildren are in school. The government can play a role to promote such microjobs by offering integrated search and listing platforms to match the demand and supply based on location. The government can also consider providing accreditation and training for persons who might want to take up microjobs. Madam Deputy Speaker, I move on to the construction industry. This is an important sector that helps to build our comfortable homes and world-class infrastructure. The past year has been difficult for the sector. I note that this year's budget did not mention additional support measures for the construction sector beyond the JSS extension. Have we forgotten the people who toiled and sweat to build our infrastructure and for our beautiful HDB homes? Their work has been badly affected by COVID-19. I have a good number of residents who work in construction, either as workers or employers. We need to do more to help this sector cope with the immediate fallout in 3 areas. First, Madam Deputy Speaker, we can do more on the manpower front. Though industry players are receiving help from the government, many short-term challenges have not been addressed. Many firms with existing projects must cope with rising costs and labour shortage as a result of the pandemic. Some foreign workers have returned home, yet the new arrivals are tightly controlled. Newly arrived work permit and S-Pass holders are required to complete a 14-day stay-home notice. Those who have recent travel histories to higher-risk countries must stay at a designated facility to undergo an additional 7 days of testing. In total, they'll be quarantined for as many as 21 days. Employers will have to pay for their accommodation and the swab test costs, which can add up to a significant amount. I urge the government to consider providing subsidies as all these amount to increased labour costs and cost of contracts. Housing the workers remain a challenge for some employers in construction. The temporary living quarters scheme is stated to expire in end March 2021. However, some employers say that they are still struggling to obtain approval for building construction temporary quarters or CTQ. Time is tight, and the TLQ should be extended while these approvals are being worked on. The foreign worker levy waiver and rebates were a lifeline for construction companies. Due to safe distancing measures, productivity at work sites have dropped tremendously. During this difficult period, can the government consider reducing workers' levies? We can reinstate levies when SMM are removed. For projects that are eligible for cost-sharing relief with contractual parties, can the government look into expediting early settlement and payment to the contractors? The COVID-19 Temporary Measures Act introduced co-sharing of project prolongation costs for public sector construction contracts. This is supposed to help the contractors with their cash flow. How many claims were made, and how many have been processed? Second, Madam Deputy Speaker, we should consider giving some priority to our local construction companies for public projects. Yesterday, Member Patrick Tay called for tougher measures to strengthen the Singaporean core workforce. Today, I would like to call for the government agencies to build Singaporean core companies. COVID-19 is not the first pandemic, nor will it be the last, that will impact our borders. It's a stark reminder for us to improve our self-sufficiency. Local preference is relevant to our construction sector. We need to give our local construction firms opportunities to develop their own expertise and grow, such that Singapore will not stagnate, even in times of crisis. A potential critique of this practice is that it undermines competitiveness, and that the winning tender might not provide the best value. Yet studies have shown that giving preference to local businesses can benefit the country's finances as a whole, even if it means spending a little more on the project itself. The local construction companies would purchase from local supply chains and service providers. This in turn creates an economic multiplier effect. Investments that circulate locally boost economic activity, employment, and tax revenue. To ensure that policies which favour local companies are transparent and fair, the government can establish certification programs and make public a database of companies that qualify for the preference. Implementing specific definitions for local preference eligibility Establishing well-developed goals, clear tracking and reporting will help to ensure that the policies are effective. This ensures accountability and that projects are value for money. Of course, in doing so, we should be mindful that there may be restrictions, such as WTO or other international agreements of which we are a party to. But if we put our minds together and work hard towards our goal, we should be able to find solutions to support our local contractors. Thirdly and lastly, Madam Deputy Speaker, as we cast our mind towards a post-COVID world, we must review our infrastructural needs accordingly. Rather than defer infrastructural projects, the government should consider taking an expansionary approach and press ahead with projects in the pipeline. This will in turn create more employment while ensuring that we are on track to adapt to post-COVID needs. Madam Deputy Speaker, in conclusion, I'm impressed by how quickly we pushed through many planned initiatives over the past year in light of the pandemic. 1 year on, the economy and employment rate are showing signs of recovery. But we must not forget to review our support for those that are struggling to catch up. In my speech, I focus on seniors and the construction industry as examples. In times of difficulties, we must do what it takes to support them. I stand in support of the budget.
Dr. Koh Poh Kun.
Madam Deputy Speaker, thank you for obliging. The Honourable Member, Mr. Gerald Giam, make a few references to my two speeches, one from last year and one yesterday about the PWM, so I thought I'm obliged to clarify some issues that he has brought up. The first thing he asked was why we push for a PWM in strata as well as solar technology sector. I have great sympathy for my brothers and sisters working in the strata management sector. As I said yesterday in my speech, this is an outsourced sector, and many of them have seen wage stagnation because as each contract is renewed, there's some resetting of their wages, and there's no career progression, even though in terms of absolute pay, they may not be at the lowest bottom end of the bottom 20. I have great sympathy for them. And I think the nature of the industry behoves us to think about a PWM model where they can see career and wage progression. So that's the reason why we're pushing for that. And in essence, when the labor movement first talked about PWM in 2012, actually the PWM construct, while it's tightly linked to low-wage workers, it was never construed as only for low-wage workers, because the whole idea of the four wage ladders, wage tied to skills, to productivity and career progression, is applied to all jobs, all job roles across the different parts of the industries. The reason why we started with the low-wage sector is because they are the ones that needs the most help. They are our brothers and sisters who needs the greatest uplift to catch up the rest of society. But beyond the lower wage sector, we want the concept and the idea of a PWM to be pervasive across all job roles so that everyone in the job can see progression in their career and no wage stagnation. Mr. Giam also talked about licensing requirement in diverse sectors at retail sector. I think that is a focus of the tripartite work group's discussion, and we hope that we can land on something that can allow us to implement this without the necessary agencies that may have a particular regulatory lever similar to other sectors that were implemented in the past. And hopefully this can be a recommendation from the work group sometime later part of the year. Mr. Giam also actually rehashed some of the points I already made yesterday about uplifting wages immediately using the workfare income supplement. And in fact, I'm glad he agrees with my suggestion to consider the wage credit scheme as a form of transitional support. So I hope that when we do so, we will get more support. And in that sense, if there were any wage increase that translates to consumer cost increase, I hope the Worker Party members can also help to convince consumers that they have to do their part as well. Now, what I do not understand is that in advocating for a sectoral wage floor across different sectors, how different is it from what we're already proposing for sectoral PWM, which starts with a sectoral wage floor anyway? And I think there is, in my mind, I thought there's some convergence there in what he's suggesting with what we're doing in the PWM sectorally. What the member has not said, however, is how does what he proposed, whether it is a pervasive minimum wage, can prevent disemployment? I have great fear that if we were to push a pervasive minimum wage that is beyond what the industry can bear, my brothers and sisters will suffer from disemployment, and we will see more unemployment out in there. And the labor movement always keeps saying this, that in pushing for too high a minimum wage can become no wage. And I think this is something that we ought to bear in mind, that the cure we're proposing cannot be worse than the disease itself.
Mr. Gerald Giam.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank you, Dr. Koh, for your clarifications. I'll address some of the points that he responded to. First, about the strata and solar, and why he feels that it's important because of the wage stagnation. And I share his concerns about wage stagnation in any sector, not just the low-wage sectors. But my point was that as important as it is to address the wage stagnation issue and provide career ladders for the different industries, why can't we just focus more first on the low-wage workers to ensure that all 100,000 low-wage workers which are not covered by the PWM now are covered first? Why don't we work harder at that first rather than venture into other things? I'm not saying that career progression is not good, and I'm not saying that it's not good to have increases in salaries beyond the minimum wage. But I think we need to really double down and focus on the low-wage workers first to ensure that they are protected before we go into other areas. I don't think we want to have a situation where perfect is the enemy of good. We want to make sure that we implement the good things first and then try and perfect it later. Now, the other point about the sectoral wage floor and how and the convergence he mentioned, yes, indeed, there is some convergence between our proposals because the minimum wage is the first component of the PWM, and it should continue to be that way. So let's focus on that first component first before we go into the career progression and other aspects. And he also mentioned about the concerns about unemployment that will be brought about by increases in wages. Yes, it's true that if we increase wages by too much, there could be unemployment. But let's look at the actual real-world examples. The cleaning sector, in the security sector, in landscaping, have we seen massive unemployment as a result of the implementation of the PWM? I don't think so. And I believe that if we implement a wage floor which is reasonable, and we have actually put out a number there, $1,300 a month, we implement a wage floor that's reasonable, I don't think we will see massive unemployment. And I think the effects of these wage increases will be minimal on many other industries.
Cool.
Madam, I think the member uses cleaning sector. I think that's probably not quite accurate because actually that is already a PWM sector, which is why you don't see increased disemployment, because there is a wage ladder together with a skills ladder. And in his proposal now, he's talking about sectoral wage floor, which in fact is what sectoral PWM is all about. Are you still advocating for your universal minimum wage that WP wants, or are you going with me now on my sectoral PWM with a minimum wage floor sectorally? So I'm a little bit confused there. I mean, has the WP position changed? But I think what member must also remember in my previous parliamentary speech on this topic is that the minimum wage floor in a PWM is not a standalone because there is a government top-up with the workfare income supplement that brings the salary way beyond 1,003. And in fact, most of them will hit closer to 2,000, 2003. So I think you need to take the whole context of what we have in place beyond the PWM. There is also the WIN's component, and we've been talking about augmenting this yesterday in my speech. I hope the member remembers my speech from yesterday.
Mr. Gerald Giam.
So Dr. Koh is trying to understand whether or not we have changed our position on this minimum wage issue. We have not changed our position. Our position still remains that we should roll out a minimum wage first to all low-wage workers who earn less than $1,300 a month. That is the position that we are still pushing for. But two things. First is that we accept that we are not in government, and the PAP is in government, and the PAP has decided to proceed with this PWM model. So we are trying, in the interest of protecting our low-wage workers, to find a way that we can propose how you can start off with this minimum wage, and then you can do those other things like career progression and wage increases. So I don't think I'm not digging in just to say that, oh, I want to stick with my position, and my position is right, your position is wrong. I think we're all working together to find out what is the best way to benefit our low-wage workers.
Dr. Koh.
Indeed, I think, Madam, this is what we've been trying to do in this House, to make sure that we take care of our most vulnerable. But I still don't understand when we talk about sectoral wage floors, we're trying to make sure that the minimum wage floor by the sector is relevant to the particular industry, the job, and what the industry can bear, what the consumers are prepared to pay for that type of services, so that that particular wage floor for the sector does not cause disemployment or unemployment in that sector. And if the members' position is that we should set an appropriate wage floor so that we do not create disincentive for employment, then surely it cannot be one single wage floor across all sectors, all job types, that can be relevant and absorbed by all different types of services and service buyers. And I think this is why we propose that the advantage for PWM is that it's customized for a sector. It's a little bit more laborious maybe, but that makes sure that it's something that industry, businesses, and consumers are prepared to bear. And I said yesterday that we are looking at the option of pushing up for vocational PWM so that it actually involves different job types, especially those in the bottom 20% of income earners across multiple sectors, and that hopefully will address a larger swath of workers who are in the lower wage. And that is our strategy of hoping to cover as many of the low-hanging fruits and those who are in need, as the member was pointing out. I hope by the end of this year, tripartite work will be able to come up with recommendations to push out occupational PWM to cover the most vulnerable who are currently not covered by the mandatory PWM sectorally.
Right, Mr. Gerald Giam, could you just clarify the point?
Just last point on the sectoral wage floor. We are pushing, we want to see a $1,300 minimum wage across all sectors eventually. So the sectoral wage floor, we acknowledge that that's one way of rolling out this $1,300 is to implement a $1,300 wage floor for each sector, go sector by sector. But it does not mean that we are saying that we should immediately start adjusting the different wages for the different sectors. That can be done very much so in the PWM, but let's get the minimum done first so that we can progress on to the next step.
Mr. Louis Ng.
Madam, my daughter Ella started her Primary 1 journey last month. It has not been an easy transition for her. In the first week, she entered school every morning in tears. It was difficult saying goodbye to her at the gate. But it was comforting for us to know that the teachers were there. I was peeping through the fence, as we parents often do, and I saw the teachers holding Ella's hand, offering her a tissue to wipe her tears, and showering her with love during this difficult period. I saw how this wasn't just about teaching, but it was a labor of love. Every morning, the principal and teachers were at the gate, cheerfully saying good morning to the students as they arrived. We received phone calls from teachers updating us about Ella, and we had Zoom calls with teachers and other parents too. I thank the teachers for being there for our children, for providing much needed care, and for their dedication. I thank them for being teachers. Madam, many people have asked me why my eyes are so red and about my eye bags. In fact, Minister Indrani was asking me about this during our break earlier, and she said I now look like a mad dinosaur. I've been called many things, but first time a mad dinosaur. But it has been a difficult Primary 1 journey for me too, waking up so early every morning to send Ella to school. Sometimes it feels like I've just fallen asleep and it's time to wake up. I guess I had a glimpse of what it's like being a teacher, waking up so early every morning, but a glimpse also because I'm sure teachers wake up much earlier than me. It's been said before, but it isn't said enough. Teachers have a tough job, and I thank them again for their loving role in nurturing our next generation. We have emerged stronger from this pandemic also because of our teachers. During the pandemic and the circuit breaker, they worked doubly hard, teaching physically in classrooms and virtually. They were out there while we kept ourselves safe at home. There are things we can and should do to make their job a little better, and this is what I will discuss today. So, Madam, let me also start by thanking MOE for its reforms in recent years, which have made education a more nurturing experience. We've stopped reminding students about how they are ranked both in class and level. We stopped grouping them into classes based on academic abilities. We stopped comparing students to their peers when grading the PSLE. The message to students has been clear. Focus on your own learning. Don't be distracted by how others are doing. As then Education Minister Ong put it, quote, learning is not a competition, but a self-discipline you need to master for life, unquote. I agree, and indeed, we have done a lot to help our students get rid of the distractions and focus on their own learning. But I feel we have not done enough for our teachers. It seems contradictory to me that teachers tell their students that students are no longer ranked and compared relative to their peers, while they themselves are ranked and compared relative to other teachers. Madam, in the past 6 months, I have spent time listening to what teachers have to say. The Singapore Teachers Union surveyed about 1,200 teachers and organised a series of closed-door dialogues with teachers of all levels who spoke candidly about their experiences. I had the privilege to hear some of their conversations and experiences. I left with a renewed appreciation for the genuine passion our teachers have for teaching. The feedback that the teachers raised at these sessions were ultimately because they want to be better teachers for their students. But I also left with some worry. Large numbers of them expressed concerns about their appraisal system. Over 80% of teachers and 70% of reporting officers, or ROs, agreed that ranking is not the best way to appraise all job holders. Today, I will share 4 proposals to tweak and refine the appraisal systems. These proposals reflect concerns on the ground, based on survey data by the union and personal anecdotes. I'm not proposing to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I'm suggesting that we make the appraisal system more standardized, transparent, fair, and formative. This will better support our teachers to do their best work. Let me take this opportunity to thank all civil servants for their essential work. My speech is about teachers because each of them influences tens and hundreds and thousands of young minds in their daily work. But it does not stop here. Starting from teachers, my hope is that the change in the appraisal system would flow through to the rest of the public service. My first proposal is to standardize the appraisal process and require schools to follow it. While about half of teachers surveyed felt there was some objectivity in the system, about 3/4 of teachers surveyed agreed that appraisals should be based on standardized criteria. Currently, teachers go through a 2-step appraisal process. First, the teacher's RO assesses the teacher, and second, the RO takes the assessment to a ranking panel of senior staff members. The ranking panel then decides on the rank and grades of teachers in the school. How do all these people decide on what a teacher really deserves? As MOE has shared, it provides guidelines and conducts trainings to advise on best practices. But the stories shared by teachers reveal that current guidelines and training are not robust enough to ensure that the appraisal is standardized. At the first stage of assessment by a RO, teachers report that subjective and irrelevant considerations are sometimes taken into account in the assessment. One teacher said that ROs prefer yes men. Quote, if you are one who asks questions and give alternate suggestions, you are deemed to be uncooperative and calculating, unquote. Another teacher said that ROs favor staff who are his friends or used to work with him in other schools. It should worry us that some of our teachers feel this way. So even if the RO thinks a teacher is good and the teacher meets or exceeds his or her targets, this doesn't mean the teacher will get a good grade. They have to fight for the teacher at the ranking panel. Many ROs themselves feel frustrated by the ranking panel. More than half of the ROs said that members of the ranking panel have an unequal say. They flag the roles of personalities and politics. One RO said that those on the panel tend to play up their own teachers while criticizing others, so that they themselves are ranked as being effective. Another RO fretted about retaliation, saying that to speak up for unfairly ranked teachers means to risk, quote, suffering the same fate, unquote. Again, we should be concerned that some ROs feel this way. Our teachers are doing their best for the students, and many do want to receive constructive feedback so that they can take steps to improve. However, the current process means that the outcome may not simply be a reflection of the teacher's performance, and again, irrelevant considerations come into the picture. I understand the challenges of evaluating a teacher's work. I also understand that MOE has frameworks in place, such as key results areas for each job level, describing key competencies and qualities to achieve. But there is more we can do to standardize the process. First, MOE can provide greater clarity to its guidelines and provide more granularity. For example, key results areas currently tell teachers what good looks like. Just like the detailed marking rubrics used for students, these key results areas should be broken down by grade so that teachers know what are the specific standards required to achieve an A, B, C, and D, and so on. Clearer appraisal standards given to ROs and ranking panels make it harder for subjective and irrelevant considerations to enter into decision making. Second, MOA should formalize its guidelines on teacher appraisals as requirements. Good guidelines are not so useful if they can be ignored or circumvented. Teachers and RO alike said that the appraisal process varies sharply from school to school. Some schools have robust and objective processes in place. Other schools may have weaker processes, which allow for more subjectivity. MOE has said its policy on teachers' appraisal seeks to balance between consistency across schools and discretionary judgment by the schools. The balance is currently tilted towards discretionary judgment. These stricter standards will move us towards consistency, limit biases, and emphasize the performance of teachers. This isn't just about what I think is right. It is what the vast majority of teachers think is right. Again, about 3/4 of teachers surveyed agreed that appraisal should be based on standardized criteria. My second proposal is that MOE enforces a clear and more consistent feedback policy for performance appraisals. About 80% of teachers surveyed did not feel that the process of ranking has been made transparent to them. Teachers don't know how to improve if they don't understand how and why they got their grade. Transparency is crucial. Currently, the feedback policy that schools must follow when conducting their annual appraisal exercise are merely guidelines. These guidelines may not have been successful in helping teachers understand the appraisal process. When we spoke to teachers to understand why they see the process as opaque, two main reasons crop up. The first reason is because information was not proactively offered to some of them. One teacher said, quote, "The grades were never explained to me for the years I joined service," unquote. The second reason is that even when some teachers ask about the process, they are given no explanation. One teacher sought to understand why they received that grade, but their RO said there was no way to discuss the performance grade. There are many more stories like these. How can anyone do better if they don't know what they're doing wrong? I think we can all empathize with how frustrating it must be to be in a situation like this. Again, there's more we can do. MOE can implement a standard procedure of how schools respond when teachers request feedback and clarifications about their grade. Second, this standard procedure needs to be enforced. As the data shows, a large majority of teachers currently see the appraisal exercise as lacking in transparency. We must make proper communications mandatory and enforce this. Third and finally, we can work with the teachers to strengthen MOE's communication policies. We can implement a whistleblowing mechanism for teachers to use when their schools are failing to abide by MOE's communication policies on appraisal. Of course, this mechanism must include measures to protect teachers from retaliation within their schools. Together, these measures will foster a more transparent system where our teachers will always know how to do better, and this means a better education for our children. Third, I propose we remove the quota for each grade. This means a teacher's grade will no longer be affected by the limited number of A's, B's, C's, and D's. Close to 80% of teachers surveyed strongly agree with this proposal. We can see how the quota system can distort incentives. Let me explain this from two directions. At the very top, each school can only give a very small percentage of A's and B's every year. Let's call this the good quota. This means it's not enough to be a terrific teacher. You have to be more terrific than everyone else. The good quota rewards you for being a big fish in a small pond. However, it is a disincentive for being in a school where there are people better than you, whom you can learn from. The quota also hurts those at the bottom. 5% of each school teachers must be graded C-, D, or E. Let's call this the bad quota. This means that even if you are a good teacher, in a school overpopulated with super good teachers, the quota may still force you to receive a terrible grade. Again, the system discourages you from surrounding yourself with the best of the best. The quota system may also be applied in ways unrelated to a teacher's performance. One teacher said that some department heads agreed to spread out the bad quota across departments by pre-selecting a few teachers from each department to get bad grades, and then fulfilling the prophecy by assigning unimportant tasks to these teachers. The bad quota would not be so painful if the bad grades were in fact not that bad. Indeed, MOE has said that the C- grade is not an adverse grade, but the reality is that those receiving C- grades and below faced a host of punitive measures, including ineligibility for promotion for 3 years and ineligibility for professional development leave. Minister Lawrence has said that schools have the flexibility for assigning grades. However, in practice, virtually all schools had teachers with C-, D, or E grades, as Minister later shared. This may be because of the additional paperwork, scrutiny, and justifications needed to exercise the flexibility. I propose to remove the quotas. Let schools assign grade based on a standardized process, as I proposed earlier. Over 80% of teachers surveyed supported the removal of the quota. The risk of fiscal imprudence is limited, as each school is given a fixed quantum of monies for performance bonuses. Standardizing the process, as well as the existing practice of having a cluster superintendent advise each ranking panel, are both powerful checks to guard against grade inflation. MOE would not be alone in this shift. Some of the most successful companies in the world have dropped relative ranking and moved towards more flexible performance management system. Amazon announced in 2016 that it would drop its stack ranking system. Even General Electric, the American conglomerate where stack ranking was popularized in the 1980s, has dropped it. Its current CEO says he prefers, quote, reviews that candidly tell an employee where they are not measuring up and what they need to do to improve, without rigidly adhering to certain percentages, unquote. General Electric has shifted to a system that emphasizes continuous dialogue and shared accountability. I also propose that we remove the punitive measures for the C- grade. 75% of teachers surveyed agreed with this. Performance management should be formative, not punitive. Teachers who struggle should not be denied the full resources to grow or the full prospect of being rewarded. 3 years with zero chance of promotion is enough to make anyone lose interest in the profession. Why would we disincentivize hard work like that? What I hope for is that our teachers spend more time improving their own performance and aspire to become better teachers instead of spending time worrying about how they are compared to others. Madam, I'm not the first MP to speak on this. This has been a long fight by MP Denise Phua and former MPs Zainal Sapari and Intan Mokhtar. Dr. Intan said previously that, quote, our appraisal system is quite summative, unquote, and spoke about the need for a more formative approach to the appraisal. MP Denise spoke about the negative aspect of forced ranking, speaking of instances where employees get pushed up in terms of their ranking because of very vocal supervisors who are able to speak up for them at ranking sessions. In the last few months, I've heard these exact concerns surface repeatedly by our teachers. Mr. Sapari, a veteran in the education service, first as a teacher, then a school principal, then a cluster superintendent. He asked for the forced ranking system to be abolished and instead adopt a criteria-based approach for ranking. Mr. Sapari, Dr. Intan, and Ms. Phua have been speaking about this since 2018. In the previous debate, Ms. Phua said, quote, to run a race whereby only a few win the trophy might be a race I think the minister has been asking us not to run. We should run races where as many as possible can make it to the finish line and as many as possible can meet a good or great performance standard, unquote. We all want what Ms. Denise Phua is calling for, but it's simply not possible under our current appraisal system. Let me end with a quote as always. Quote, a teacher plants the seed of knowledge, sprinkles them with love, and patiently nurtures their growth to produce tomorrow's dreams, unquote. So as teachers work hard to create a nurturing environment for our children, let's also create a nurturing environment for them. Let's make our appraisal system more standardized, transparent, fair, and formative. The surveys show that the majority of teachers support this call. But, Madam, I know our performance management system of stack ranking is a sacred cow. We have used this system for decades, but for once, I'm not asking for a sacred cow to be slaughtered. As a vegetarian, I very much prefer that. I'm asking for us to look after this sacred cow better, and for our appraisal system, again, to be more standardized, transparent, fair, and formative. With a strong, engaged, and empowered teaching workforce, we will continue to emerge stronger. Thank you.
The one result.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I rise in support of the budget. Now, 2020 was a tough and disruptive year, with the pandemic adding complexity to our lives, our livelihoods, and our norms. Thus, I'm grateful for the relief and assistance provided by the government to cushion the impact of COVID-19. This year, while the fight against COVID-19 continues, and we know it is far from over, we are indeed in a better position to emerge stronger together. I move for us to consider, or rather reconsider, some of the important lessons learned. The COVID-19 situation has surfaced one pertinent issue that's always been stigmatized: mental health. After my adjournment motion last year, I received several emails. Some complain about working from home and the pressures that they face. But coincidentally, it was during the annual ranking exercise, and many shared the pressure that they face and they have to perform. Now, the fast-paced and highly competitive nature of a meritocratic system produces the best results globally. But it also means our workers face immense stress. Some highlighted the toxicity and the dog-eat-dog atmosphere. Others felt the pressure to maintain a high grade, whereas some are just trying to avoid a C- grade. I was wondering, why a C- grade? Because a C- grade may mean limited developmental opportunities and perhaps the end of their career. Now, as an educator, I believe that it's important that we continue to recognize our top performers. But I also believe that those who did not do well for whatever reason be given a chance to bounce back and emerge stronger. I call for the public service to lead the way in tweaking the ranking exercise and move towards a balanced model of performance and development. And in that way, we holistically support the emotional and mental well-being in workplaces. Madam Speaker, another issue that was raised fervently by young and old was the influence of social media. Instagram, TikTok, the latest app, Clubhouse, if you're not in that yet, and other social media platforms allow us to connect virtually, but it also means that nothing is private anymore. Name-calling, rumor spreading, deliberate online falsehoods are pertinent and challenging aspects of social media. I've seen how both youths as well as adults are belittled online by their peers and the damaging effects of cyberbullying. Now, as a father myself, I'm worried for our children who might be vulnerable and having their mental well-being affected. Now, collectively, mental health issues become more apparent and intervention is much needed in times like this. We need to make concrete and concerted efforts to support those with mental health issues beyond mere awareness and promote positive mental well-being. I call again for these 4 strategies. First, to enhance mental health literacy, as well as digital literacy programs in our schools. Second, to create more accessible touch points so that those who feel that they need help, they are able to do so easily. Third, including mental health screening as part of our physical health screening. And this should not be limited to just schools or workplaces, but also within our community so that our seniors may also receive help. Lastly, to introduce timeouts at workplaces and in schools so that those who are under stress may take the option to take a mental break. But such breaks are recorded, and the next time one takes it, we know that they may have something that we need to help with. Now, the strategies I presented requires a whole of community effort. Madam, mental health is not a life sentence. It is not something that one has to go through alone. There are ways for us to overcome these challenges. Early mitigation would certainly help, but we need to do it together. We can only emerge stronger together as a united society, not only in terms of social or economic factors, but also in terms of our mental health. Madam Speaker, the collapse of certain sectors and the streamlining of the workforce brought upon by COVID-19 has exposed the inability of some of our fresh graduates to be agile in a volatile job environment. Now, recently I had a chat with a resident who is about to finish his diploma in aerospace engineering. Now, as the industry is deeply impacted by the pandemic, it's natural that he was feeling anxious. He expressed that he felt that he made the wrong decision when choosing the course. That should not be the case. In my maiden speech, I highlighted that early specialization constrains skill sets and limits opportunities. I emphasized the need for broad skills that can be generalized across other disciplines so that we can put our fresh graduates on a better footing and give them the confidence to apply their technical skills across other relevant sectors. I call for MOE to continuously review pathways to prepare our graduates with the agility to navigate through the varied and diversified workforce and discover their passion. I also call to review how we can ease the progression from secondary school to ITEs or the polytechnics, so that anyone who has a passion for a certain field, they are allowed to seize it. Now, I've taught many students from the Polytechnic Foundation Program, the PFP, and many have done very well. In fact, they do even better than the ones who come in through the O-level system or route. And I felt that because they enter the Polytechnic slightly earlier than the rest, it allows them that time and space not only to settle down, but to chart the education journey better. Now, finally, I hope that we continue to review the curriculum in IHLs so that it remains robust and, most importantly, relevant, working closely with the community and industry to ensure that every Singaporean is future-ready and remains employable. Madam Speaker, my final point is on the support for our healthcare workers. Without a doubt, our healthcare workers deserve all the accolades that come their way. I would like to thank them for their sacrifice and their hard work and hope that the proposed increase in salary laid out in the budget will spur them even further. But we know it's not all about money. Nursing is inherently a very demanding profession and entails long hours and overnight schedules. Now, part of the job includes dealing with angry, mostly frustrated patients and family members. We must continue to provide them with the best support possible, from ensuring work-life balance to enhancing their career pathways to continually provide opportunities for them to develop and gain expertise. But above all, it is about protecting them against the abuse and harassment that they face in conducting their daily duties. Now, the number of abuse and harassment cases increased from 1,080 in 2018 to 1,300 last year. Now, over the same period, the number of such cases involving on-duty public healthcare workers that were reported to the police under the Protection of Harassment Act increased from 40 to 58. Therefore, I call for us to review the processes to enhance the support and protection for our healthcare workers. Madam Deputy Speaker, please allow me to end my speech in Malay. Saya menyokong belanjawan yang dibentangkan minggu lalu. Sedang ekonomi kita pulih daripada impak COVID-19, aspek lain dalam kehidupan kita juga mula menunjukkan bibit-bibit kebangkitan. Namun, usaha kita melawan COVID-19 ini belum lagi selesai. Dalam kita bangkit menangani wabak ini, saya ingin menyentuh 3 aspek yang penting. Pertama, peri pentingnya kita menjaga kesihatan mental kita. Saya telah menyarankan 4 strategi untuk kita sama-sama memberikan tumpuan yang lebih terhadap kesihatan mental. Pertama, mewajibkan pendidikan kesihatan mental serta program digital literasi di sekolah-sekolah. Kedua, memudahkan akses kepada mereka yang mengalami isu-isu mental untuk segera mendapatkan bantuan. Ketiga, menerapkan pemeriksaan kesihatan mental dalam pemeriksaan kesihatan fizikal yang sedia ada. Dan akhir sekali, memperkenalkan time out ataupun ruang masa kepada para pelajar dan pekerja yang mengalami tekanan atau isu-isu kesihatan mental. Selain kesihatan mental, saya turut menyentuh mengenai mempelbagaikan aliran pendidikan. Dengan wabak yang sedang melanda kita, ramai pelajar bimbang mengenai prospek pekerjaan mereka pada masa hadapan. Saya menekankan perlunya institusi pendidikan menawarkan ilmu kemahiran yang dapat atau boleh dipraktikkan di semua lapangan kerja. Ia akan membuat graduan kita lebih berdaya saing serta memberi keyakinan dan peluang lebih baik dalam mendapatkan pekerjaan di dalam masa hadapan. Akhir sekali, ialah sistem sokongan untuk pekerja sektor penjagaan kesihatan. Kami berbangga para jururawat kami memahami peranan profesional mereka dan terus berkhidmat dengan cemerlang. Kami mengucapkan terima kasih atas pengorbanan dan kerja keras mereka. Saya mengalu-alukan rancangan kenaikan gaji untuk pekerja sektor penjagaan kesihatan seperti yang dibentangkan dalam belanjawan. Namun, selain sokongan keuangan, perhatian juga harus diberi dari segi meluaskan laluan kerjaya, melebarkan ruang dan peluang untuk meningkatkan kemahiran. Akhir sekali dan pada saya paling penting adalah memberi mereka perlindungan dari tekanan dan gangguan yang mungkin mereka hadapi semasa menjalankan tugas. Saya ingin memberi jaminan kepada masyarakat bahawa anggota Parlimen PAP akan terus menjaga dan prihatin atas semua golongan secara holistik dan menyeluruh. Di dalam posting Facebook saya baru-baru ini mengenai pelancaran M Kuasa 3 di Jalan Besar, saya meminjam pepatah Melayu yang diucapkan oleh Perdana Menteri pada 2018, seikat bak serai, seikat bak sirih, serumpun bak serai. Belanjawan tahun ini memberi sokongan kepada semua lapisan masyarakat. Hanya dengan teguh bersatu dan membantu antara satu sama yang lain, kita mampu menjadi masyarakat yang gemilang dan bangkit dengan lebih kukuh bersama. Madam Speaker, I support the budget.
Parliamentary Secretary Eric Chua.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the budget for the upcoming fiscal year is a continuation of the government's promise to secure lives and livelihoods to outlast the pandemic. It also takes a longer view of building a sustainable home for our future generations. While I applaud our bid to support businesses, workers, and families in a more targeted fashion, I would like to sound the alarm on two issues. First, on our youth's state of mental well-being, particularly against the backdrop of COVID-19. Second, on how we could take better care of a smaller but no less important segment of our society, our differently abled youth. First, on youth mental well-being. The 2016 Singapore Mental Health Study found that 1 in 7 persons has experienced a mood, anxiety, or alcohol use disorder in his or her lifetime. This was a marked increase from the same study conducted in 2010, where 1 in 8 persons was found to have suffered from some form of mental disorder. Also noteworthy in the 2016 study was the finding that young people stood out as a demographic group more vulnerable to mental disorders. And the same survey also found that a large majority, in fact, 78% of people with mental illness did not seek help. Now, stigma could have driven them away from seeking help. As many as 7 in 10 think that persons with mental health conditions experience discrimination in their daily lives, according to a 2017 NCSS study on attitudes towards persons with mental health conditions in Singapore. Overall, there's still a lack of understanding of mental health conditions, with 1 in 3 persons expressing the view that mental health conditions stem from a lack of self-discipline or willpower. 2 in 10 felt that persons with mental health conditions should not be given any responsibility, while only a little over 5 in 10 were willing to work with a person with mental health conditions. I think these statistics paint a stark picture of our views on people with mental health conditions. It is not enough for us just to have a conversation. We need to change the way we think about mental health if we have the well-being of our younger generations at heart, and more importantly, we need to act. Now, I recently met Courtney, a cheerful and confident 20-year-old lady, quite the high achiever, or so it seems. As a teenager, Courtney had it all. She did well academically and landed a scholarship at a local institution. Things turned southward when Courtney started struggling to turn up in school, had difficulty socializing with her peers, and ran into trouble with some of her teachers over flagging attendance. Unknown to people around Courtney and even herself then was the fact that this young life was in fact dealing with underlying mental health conditions. In fact, it did not even occur to her that it was why she had behaved differently from before. And what she said to herself at that point in time was very revealing, and I quote her, "I had strong thoughts that I'm a terrible person. Everyone hates me. I don't deserve sympathy. I don't deserve to feel I'm suffering. I come from a loving family. How could I be someone who suffers?" Things were soon bad enough, and Courtney was dropped from her scholarship. She chose to leave Singapore in 2017 to pursue a vocational program in New Zealand. Courtney soldiered on in a foreign land, still not recognizing her latent conditions. Now, it all came crashing down again for her in November 2019, where medication she was on then exacerbated her severe mood swings. She regularly broke down, so much so that she could not carry on with public performances on several nights, which then at the time formed a big part of her assessment at vocational school. Finally, she sought help. She was diagnosed with depression and the lesser-known premenstrual dysphoric disorder, or PMDD. Now, looking back, Courtney's main regret was that no one around her, and not even herself, had recognized that she had mental health issues. The lack of awareness and stigma makes it hard for the community to identify such issues, much less to respond. And it also makes it much harder for medical professionals to even get a chance to help. Courtney is blessed as her parents have stood by her all this while, supporting her even in her darkest hours. For Courtney, the key issue now is to help youngsters suffering silently from mental health issues to normalize help seeking. And this work is even more urgent now, given the backdrop of the global pandemic. COVID-19 reached our shores a year ago and has left the world grappling with the havoc it has wreaked on lives and livelihoods. For our youth, whether they're coping with home-based learning or transitioning from student to working adult life, the pandemic has only made already stressful rites of passages even more daunting. In fact, a National Youth Council survey found mental health a consistent challenge that youth face during the pandemic. Madam Deputy Speaker, I hope members of this House will agree with me that the time to act is now. We need to do more to help our young ones struggling with mental health issues, and we need to do so sooner rather than later. I will next talk about a group of youth that's also close to my heart, but for different reasons, our differently abled youth. Before I proceed, I would like to declare that I'm volunteering as a board member with the Very Special Arts, VSA, Singapore, a charity that empowers youth with disabilities to pursue and realize their potential in the arts through continuing education. After DPM Heng's budget speech last Tuesday, I reached out to a group of VSA's parents. Many of them applaud the Inclusive Support Program pilot, which will see the integrated provision of early intervention and early childhood services so that we can better help children with developmental needs upstream. However, their consensus was also that not only can we do more to better serve youth with disability, we can do it quite differently, especially when they complete formal education at 18. I'd like to focus on 3 issues, namely education, employment, and housing. Firstly, education. Raising a child is a lot of work. I know that from my own experience in the past 8 months, but I can only imagine the financial, emotional, logistical demands that parents of differently abled children face. Roger, father of 19-year-old Floyd, a young man with autism, shared with me, and I quote, "Many fail to realize that it is more costly to raise a child with special needs. Often, in such families, only one parent works because the other parent remains at home to continue teaching life skills to the child until they are independent and socially appropriate." Unquote. Sally, mother to 19-year-old Amelia, a young woman with mild autism and mild dyslexia, shared with me that education for children with disabilities can be expensive. The monthly fees for a Singapore citizen to receive an education in a mainstream MOE secondary school is $25. In contrast, the monthly fee for an autistic student at a Pathlight school is $250. When Amelia was going through school some years back, her monthly fee at Pathlight then, at the time, was $500. As Amelia has mild dyslexia, Sally had to fork out an additional $400 a month for programs at the Dyslexia Association of Singapore. All in all, $900 a month for Amelia's education. Now, to be sure, the gap between fees for an education in mainstream versus special education or SPED schools has closed over the years. And there are financial assistance schemes available in both mainstream as well as SPED schools to ensure that no child is denied an education. However, could we do more to help so these families are not unnecessarily burdened with financial strains just because they have a differently abled child? And could we also allow them to utilize their Skills Futures credit to pursue A, continuing education, such as those offered at the Very Special Arts, or B, for speech, occupational, or psychotherapy, services of which many will need well into adulthood. Second, on employment. One common international definition of disability, but according to one UN report, 50 to 70% of persons with disabilities of working age are unemployed amongst industrialized countries. Now, this translates into an employment rate of about 30 to 50%. According to our Ministry of Manpower, MOM, 28.6% of resident persons with disabilities aged 15 to 64 are employed, while another 4.2% are active job seekers. While there are certainly differences in how disability is defined in the various contexts, we can do more as one inclusive society to improve employment prospects for this group of people. Parents I spoke to asked whether the government can mandate a hiring quota for companies to recruit staff with disabilities or to reward companies for inclusive hiring practices, just as how the Seoul Garden Group hire interns with disabilities through the SG Enables School to Work transition program. Last year, I understand that 64 organizations were lauded at the President's challenge for the inclusive hiring practices. And while there are schemes such as the Enabling Employment Credits and the Job Growth Incentive that encourages employers to hire inclusively, we need this to become the norm. At the workplace, we can do better by sensitizing both employers and co-workers to be better equipped to work with differently abled individuals. We need to foster an inclusive mindset so mainstream employers and employees are mindful of both the sensibilities and sensitivities of working with their colleagues with disabilities. I understand this is something that SG Enable is already working through its Open Door program to equip workplaces with skill sets to interact with individuals with disabilities, but we need more companies to be on board so collectively we can make our workplaces truly more inclusive. Lastly, on housing, many parents of children with disabilities worry endlessly about whether their children will be able to fend for themselves long after they depart from this world. This is also what Diana, mother of 25-year-old Aaron, a young man diagnosed with autism, related to me. As many in this community work part-time, parents worry over whether their child will be able to afford a roof over their heads. In December last year, HDB announced the launch of Singapore's first assisted living flats for seniors. Could we not consider a similar housing option for this community, in addition to existing options such as adult disability homes? Madam Deputy Speaker, Roosevelt famously once said, "We cannot build the future for our youth, but we can build our youth for the future." So build our youth we must, not just on hard skills that will allow them to compete with their peers in the global marketplace, but also on softer skills of resilience, inner strength, and overall well-being. As we progress as a society in the grand course of history, let us all be kinder to one another and not forget the vulnerable ones amongst us. Notwithstanding the points I've raised above, Madam Deputy Speaker, I support the budget.
Deputy Leader.
Madam Deputy Speaker, on behalf of Leader, may I seek your consent and the general assent of members to move a motion to take the proceedings on the business set down on the order paper for today beyond the moment of interruption, please.
I give my consent. Does the Deputy Leader have the general assent of the honourable members present to so move?
Deputy Speaker,
Leader.
I beg to move that the proceedings on the business set down on the order paper for today be proceeded beyond the moment of interruption.
By the Deputy Leader. As many as are of the opinion, say aye. To the contrary, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Mr. Sakyandi.
Madam Speaker, I thank DPM for its fair, inclusive and sustainable budget with a focus on supporting future growth. Today we are in the recovery stage because Singaporeans have worked very hard collectively to keep us safe and make the best of the pandemic. Madam Speaker. Today we are in a recovery stage because Singaporeans have worked very hard collectively to keep us safe and make the best of the pandemic. We must push ahead with the momentum so that we don't let these efforts go to waste. In my speech today, I will speak briefly about one key area to leverage on further opportunities and change. I will share my concerns on immediate challenges pertaining to cost of living, particularly the petrol duties hike. Finally, I'll round up my budget speech with my thoughts on our fiscal plans. Manufacturing plays a key role in our post-COVID economic strategy. The sector currently accounts for about 21%, or $106 billion of our total gross domestic product. It also hires around 12% of the workforce. COVID-19 has also propelled the demand for digital services and smart technology. This has led to an immense interest in smart manufacturing. The concept of digital twinning, in particular, has become increasingly valuable in transforming industrial operations in an era where remote working is encouraged and safe distancing required to limit the number of physically present workers. The digital twin captures insights on key operations at manufacturing plant, allowing employees to respond by remotely reconfiguring processes and mitigating problems in real time. There's also heightened demand for collaborative robots in healthcare and manufacturing. Post-COVID-19, smart manufacturing is expected to be worth $220.4 billion by 2025. And the government plans to grow our manufacturing sector by 50% over the next 10 years. The goal is to pave the way for qualitative transformation, with advanced manufacturing forming a larger portion of the sector. This is good news, but two key problems continue to plague the sector over the years. First, how can we accelerate digitalization in more of our manufacturing companies beyond the existing grants and programs? Maybe we can help more of our companies embrace digital twinning technology, raise productivity in our current environment now. Second, retaining talent and speeding up our capability transfer programs. Companies also require talents to create, manage, and maintain these technologies. According to the Singapore Manufacturing Federation, companies have problems hiring talent like robotic engineers, software developers, and programmers. Retaining local talent is yet another challenge. So companies express a preference for retaining their S-Pass holders. Undeniably, Singapore faces a labour crunch in the tech sector. This skills gap will require some years to shore up. In the meantime, the extension of the Capability Transfer Programme, or CTP, to 2024 to support foreign to local skills transfer is a viable support to grow the local pool of tech talents. In my adjournment motion in 2019 on enhancing the role of TAFEP, Tripartite Alliance for Fair and Progressive Employment Practices, to tackle workplace and job discrimination, I spoke about localizing jobs and legislation to address job discrimination. I had also proposed then to leverage on the existing CTP and expand it to support the transfer of capabilities from foreign employees who are already in Singapore. With the extension of the CTP in this budget, it has been projected that over 970 locals and more than 140 companies will benefit from 140 projects. I laud the efforts and the focus now on the CTP and hope we can increase the number of projects in manufacturing and include collaboration with MNCs, with the goal of facilitating more skills transfer and retention to build a core of highly skilled Singaporean workers. Separately, I was actually hoping to hear more plans from DPM in his speech to expand the Professional Conversion Programme, or PCP, to potentially shore up supply of labour into the tech sector. I hope MAM can share more in detail about expanded PCP plans during the COS. This is one area we need to focus on. The reallocation of our young, middle-aged and senior workforce to sectors which need it most and with speed if possible, subject to existing constraints. Madam Speaker, I now move on to the more immediate concerns of the public, cost of living. Domestic inflation will eventually go up as the global and domestic economy recovers, and following that, global easing by central banks will eventually be removed. This is likely to be a global concern in the next few years if the COVID situation improves. The inflation forecast for OECD countries is set to rise gradually to 1.8% by end of 2022. Domestically, inflation was negative during the pandemic, but projected to climb up to around 1.5% in 2025. I would like to thank DPM for not raising the GST this year, and there is the GST $6 billion assurance package announced last year, which will help to offset GST increase for low-income households for up to 10 years and 5 years for middle-income households. As our economy is currently in the recovery stage, new jobs are created, job support scheme continues for hard-hit sectors, and there are real wage increases over time, especially if additional sectors identified for the progressive wage model. So Singaporeans need not be too worried about inflation for now. Madam Speaker, in Malay. Tuan Speaker, kebimbangan tentang kenaikan kos kehidupan tidak boleh dinafikan. Dengan kenaikan duty petrol seperti yang diumumkan dalam belanjawan, akan ada kenaikan 10 hingga 15 sen per liter. Tetapi impaknya kepada kadar inflasi masih rendah. Komponen petrol hanya 1.9% dalam basket CPI dan dengan kenaikan harga minyak dan tenaga dan kenaikan baru ini, ia mungkin akan menambah hanya sebanyak 0.1 hingga 0.2% poin untuk inflasi. Tetapi soalannya, mengapa sekarang? DPM telah mengutarakan bahawa ia adalah satu langkah penting ke arah pengangkutan yang lebih bersih dan kalait dan agar tidak menggalakkan penggunaan kenderaan enjin pembakaran dalaman. Selain itu, jika kita lihat, kenaikan ini adalah sebahagian daripada siri pergerakan penyusunan duty selama bertahun-tahun. Kenaikan duty petrol pada tahun 2015 dan penyusunan semula duty untuk diesel pada tahun 2017 dan 2019. Saya juga akur kenaikan kali ini adalah kenaikan yang lebih kecil berbanding dengan 2015. Namun, bagi orang awam, ia masih dilihat sebagai satu lagi kenaikan harga atau kenaikan kos kehidupan. Mereka yang memandu atau menunggang motosikal mencari nafkah seperti penumpang, penghantaran dan pemandu kenderaan mungkin terkesan. Untuk meringankan peralihan, pemerintah memberikan rebat cukai jalan raya 15% kepada pemilik kereta persendirian selama 1 tahun, sementara pemilik motosikal akan mendapat rebat cukai jalan 60%. Bagi mereka yang menggunakan kenderaan untuk mencari rezeki, pemerintah menyediakan offset tambahan untuk memudahkan peralihan. Di luar rebat cukai petrol bagi mereka yang menggantung kepada kenderaan untuk mencari nafkah, jika mereka berpendapatan rendah dan menengah, mereka akan dibantu oleh berbagai langkah sokongan dan pemindahan sosial. Langkah sokongan ini sebahagian dibiayai oleh cukai kami, termasuk duty petrol. Bukan itu saja, saya juga prihatin bajet tahun ini ada memperuntukkan pakej sokongan rumah tangga bajet 2021 yang terdiri daripada voucher GST, rebat SNCC, voucher CDC dan top-up untuk anak-anak yang bersekolah juga akan dibantu untuk mengurangkan kenaikan kos sara hidup. Namun, untuk capai perubahan jangka panjang dan mendorong pemandu kenderaan lebih mesra alam, saya menggesa pemerintah untuk menolong mereka yang terjejas seperti pemilik motosikal transit ke kenderaan elektrik atau hybrid buat masa 5 hingga 10 tahun akan datang. Tahun lalu, pemerintah melonggarkan peraturan mengenai motor elektrik, membenarkan motosikal berkuasa tinggi di jalan raya sebagai sebahagian daripada usaha untuk mendorong penggunaan kenderaan yang lebih bersih. Tetapi pada Mac 2020, hanya ada 2 motosikal elektrik yang didaftarkan di Singapura. Daripada jumlah keseluruhan motosikal lebih dari 140,000. Kos motosikal elektrik yang jauh lebih tinggi berbanding dengan setara berkuasa petrolnya adalah penghalang. Motosikal elektrik juga mempunyai masa pengecasan panjang 6 hingga 8 jam secara purata untuk pengisian penuh. Dorongan kami membina lebih banyak pengecasan EV, saya harap juga melibatkan keupayaan untuk mengecas motosikal dengan cepat. Di Norway, yang terkenal sebagai pemimpin dunia dalam penetrasi EV dan kadar penjualan, pemerintah memberi insentif kepada pemilikan EV dengan menghapus 25% cukai penjualan mereka dari pembelian EV baru pada tahun 2001. Jadi bolehkah pemerintah bekerjasama dengan peruncit dan pengeluar motosikal elektrik tempatan untuk mendapatkan motosikal dengan harga yang berpatutan untuk penunggang penghantaran kami? Bolehkah pemerintah juga bekerjasama dengan syarikat penyewaan kenderaan elektrik agar kos sewa lebih ekonomik bagi pengguna? Pada masa ini harganya lebih mahal untuk menyewa kenderaan elektrik berbanding dengan kereta enjin petrol. Madam Speaker, I now move to my last point on fiscal plans during and beyond the COVID-19 crisis. I support Budget 2021's plan to fund future infrastructure investments via the Singapore bond, and hope, as part of our fiscal strategy in this current environment, we are not too constrained in speeding up our capital and physical investment commitments to put us in better state for the future. I would like to take the opportunity to suggest, as part of inculcating inclusivity in our fiscal strategy, to allow the public to invest in any future green bonds and other long-term infrastructure-related bonds issued by the government. For example, in the past budgets, we had offered shares to citizens which are linked to GDP growth. The Singapore Savings Bond is also very well sought after. So are there plans to issue more and smaller retail green bonds or notes to Singaporeans so as to have a stake in Singapore's sustainable future? Before I end, Madam Speaker, with the multiple budgets last year and the draw on our reserves, there is concern as to how we will fund things we need to do going forward. In that regard, some, including the Honourable Member Hazel Phua, who's not here, have called for the full extent of our reserves to be made known. As someone who works in the financial markets and currency markets, I would like to share my frank thoughts from a professional viewpoint why we should strongly never reveal the data of our reserves. Let me explain why. Unlike most countries, Singapore utilizes the exchange rate as the instrument of monetary policy. It is key to note this. Most other countries use the interest rate as a monetary policy tool. This choice is made based on our economy's unique circumstances, and also the fact that exchange rate is relatively controllable through direct intervention in the foreign exchange markets. On the other hand, this makes us vulnerable to speculation, currency speculation, and attacks. We have seen such attacks during the Asian financial crisis in 1997-1998, impacting our economy and jobs. In fact, I started looking for a job right smack in the aftermath of the speculative attacks on some currencies in the Asian region during the Asian financial crisis in 1998, right after school. And let me tell you, it was not easy back then. The impact then on sentiment, the economy, and jobs in Asia and Singapore was bad. As a financial center, there's also the risk of capital flows if our currency is attacked for speculative reasons. I don't think we want to add in the additional element of this risk into the equation for our Singaporean job seekers. So publicizing data from our reserves is akin to revealing the size of our ammunition to hedge funds and speculators out there with large pool of funds to play with. Not only that, other market participants may also join the bandwagon and ride that speculation. And those are in not just in billions, the potential it could be even higher. The potential risks and downsides outweigh the benefits of transparency. Our geopolitical context is also vastly different from other countries that publicize details about their reserves, like Norway. Norway's monetary policy is that of an inflation targeting regime to achieve low and stable inflation. Norway's policy rate is the interest rate on banks' overnight deposit rates in the Norges Bank, and its currency is free floating. And remember, for Singapore, I mentioned earlier, Singapore uses its exchange rate, not its interest rates. In Norway, its petrol-driven economy is also very different from ours, and with a VAT of up to 25% value-added tax. It is in stark contrast to our GST rate. So with vastly different economic considerations, it is not wise to compare and say that we too should disclose our reserves just because others did. I would also remind that transparency is practice where it is safe and sensible to do so, and it isn't true that our reserves are completely undisclosed. For example, Temasek and MAS fund sizes are made public. Only GIC's is not. Madam Speaker, as a member of this House, I would like to explicitly indicate my concerns about any moves to be more transparent on our reserves. Yes, Honourable Member Hazel Phua asked for the total reserves data from an economic fiscal prudence angle. So what is the amount and how it should be used? It is understandable that people want to know. But foreign actors, currency speculators, and anyone who does not wish us well is also interested to know. And I mentioned, people may join the bandwagon. So there are trade-offs. So the government has to weigh in balance. The balance struck is that the government does not disclose a lot, but disclosed a lot already, but not all. And I'm glad it is done delicately and so delicately by a responsible government. It would be prudent that we do not make unnecessary moves to reveal our total reserves, though sincere in its intent for more information, that it can unwittingly lead to significant negative economic outcomes, given our domestic context. The results of decades of sound monetary and fiscal policies are evident in the resilience of our economy, which has weathered multiple storms over the decades. So once again, I would like to explicitly state and indicate my concerns about any moves to be more transparent on our reserves. Since we are on the topic of reserves, Madam Speaker, I would also like to comment on the suggestion of the Honourable Member, Mr. Leong Man Wai, to use all the NRIC and not just 50%. I would be seriously concerned if the government were to do this. The current 50 to 50% divide was explained by PM when the framework was first introduced in 2008. It was to have fairness between the present and future generations, even though it is not an exact science. 50% for now, this generation, and 50% plot back for future generations. If we use all now, there is little, if anything, left in terms of NRIC for the younger generation, the younger and future generations to come. Importantly, by plowing back 50%, we continue to grow our reserves, and that's important, while at the same time allowing the government to tap on part of the investment income for current spending. The principle of fairness, responsibility, prudent stewardship, and having a thought for the future is important for the government and permeates every budget. Madam Speaker, yesterday, Honourable Member Hazel Phua also separately suggested that the government target towards a higher 50% wage component as a percent of GDP. I would like to ask the Honourable Ms. Hazel Phua, actually intended to ask her to clarify on her unique suggestion to target wage component of GDP, as I assume she knows that a major reason why wages as a percent of GDP is lower than our operating surplus of corporates and other organizations of 66.2% of GDP, because of our heavy MNC presence and the structure of our economy. So I was thinking whether she's suggesting to reduce our MNC presence in Singapore now at this point in time. Unfortunately, she's not here, but there's something I was curiously wanting to find out. Madam Speaker, on that point and on that note, I support the Emerging Stronger Together budget, a budget which aims to raise the welfare of the people in the long run. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Professor James Lim.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm wondering if I could obtain a clarification from the member on why he feels that the revelation of reserves would necessarily be destabilizing. And I'll just point out a few reasons why I disagree. And the first is that revealing a target as well as reserves certainly could encourage destabilizing speculation, but it could also encourage stabilizing speculation. If we were off our fundamentally determined exchange rates, we could encourage market participants to actually engage in speculative activity that will get us back on to our fundamental exchange rate. And this, in fact, was a point that was routinely argued by the inventor of the band basket crawl system, John Williamson, for which we, the MAS at least, subscribes to, the BBC system. The second point I would like to point out is that actually, while it is convenient to argue that we have a distinct system in terms of exchange rate policy, by purchasing power parity, all exchange rate policy is in fact monetary policy. So even though it is the case that we target explicitly the exchange rate, it will have implications for inflation. And hence, when other countries, as the member has cited, such as Norway, reveal that they have a certain amount of reserves and they are subscribers to an inflation targeting regime, it is not, in fact, distinct from our own exchange rate targeting regime.
Mrs. Sakyandi, do you want to respond?
So, the Honourable Professor James Lim, if I can try to recall your first question in second, I'll probably take your second question first. Second question is about, if I can recall again, Professor, you asked whether on the first one, there is stabilizing and destabilizing currency at speculative attacks.
Suggesting that...
And it's stabilizing.
That speculation can both be destabilizing as well as stabilizing.
Okay, so I just want to share with you, I started off working in the MAS back in 98, 99. The impact of the currency attacks can never be stabilizing. It has ramifications on the economy, it has ramifications on jobs, but back in the Asian financial crisis, the impact on the currencies that were specifically attacked, like Thailand, and even to some extent other countries in ASEAN region, was very significant, to the point that the currencies depreciated so much and that it led to the ramifications and cascading effects on the economy. So what I saw in the Asian financial crisis, which is a perfect example of a speculative attack, led to economic ramifications that are not destabilizing at all. And that's from my own lived experience in 1998, 1999. Not theory. So the theoretical element that you shared from a theory perspective, that there can be destabilizing impact of currency adjustments or misalignments. Yeah, can be stabilizing. Maybe in theory does not make sense as well, unless you're talking about misalignments in the long run that eventually corrects itself in time. Yeah. So that's the first question.
Yeah, if I may clarify, I should point out that I am, in fact, old enough to have also lived through the Asian financial crisis, and I'm aware of the conditions surrounding it. So this is not just in theory, it was also my lived experience.
Okay. Yeah, second question, Professor James? Norway's policy. How is it different from the Singapore's policy? If I may put it in general terms?
No, I was pointing out that I did not think that there were distinct policies, because all exchange rate policy is, in fact, monetary policy, and I'm wondering if you could clarify why you thought they were distinct.
Okay. Let me try to explain to you.
Okay, Mr. Sakyandi, can you just, can the two of you just speak to the chair and just clarify the point?
Yeah. Madam Speaker, to answer the question about the difference between Norway's monetary policy and Singapore's monetary policy, they're very distinct. I mentioned in my speech about the different economic context of Norway, where it's a petrol-driven economy, and where Singapore is a very trade-driven economy. And the reliance of using exchange rate as a controllable intermediate target in the Singapore economy is very distinct from Norway, which uses a policy rate, interest rate or deposit rates in its central bank. So the instrument being used, I think the important issue here when you're talking about reserves, in this situation for Singapore, when Singapore uses exchange rate as its policy tool, there is a direct intervention in the markets using currency spot to have a direct impact on the Sing dollar. And that is very specific because we target the exchange rate. If you look at Norway uses policy rates and its exchange rate is freely floated. So for Singapore's case, the very fact that we target an intermediate target of an exchange rate has some impact in terms of our ability to directly intervene in the markets and thus run down on our reserves from MAS reserves. So there is a very direct impact from a policy perspective, and thus ramifications on our ability to have a direct rundown on reserves. Whereas for Norway's case, the policy target is totally different. It's using policy rates or interest rates.
Okay, Mr. Sakyandi, thank you for clarifying. I think we can move on. Mr. Alex Yam.
Madam Deputy Speaker, it's always a challenge to be one of the last speakers of the day, but it's also an opportunity to look back at the day and slowly remove paragraphs that other honourable members have already covered. As you may well conclude from my written notes, I've thrown out my original and just gone for some key points. My first plea this evening is, amidst the boldness of this budget that looks beyond the now and focuses on the future, post-pandemic, ready not just to take off, but also be at the front of the pack, that we take another bold step. And that suggestion is to make vaccination mandatory. Let me explain why. We've taken bold steps to control the pandemic over the course of the last 1 year, many of which involve making things compulsory, mask wearing, social distancing, amongst others. We now have in our hands a weapon that brings the fight to the virus. And over 216 million people worldwide have received at least the first dose. Adverse reactions have been very, very low, much like many other common vaccines that we take on a regular basis, and much less risk compared to smoking. The decision to vaccinate is not just personal to holder, doesn't just impact you as an individual. It's a matter of life or death for loved ones, friends, fellow countrymen, especially those who, because of medical reasons, are unable to be vaccinated. And we have invested significantly in this endeavor. So let's be bold. We can't be willy-nilly about it. If we believe in it, that it works, we should stand by it. And therefore, it should be conditionally opt-out rather than voluntarily opt-in. Because only when we control this enemy, this virus, can the bold moves that this budget and its intent bear fruit. On the topic of fruits, I now move to the kitchen larder. We've been drawing from our reserves in the last 2 years. Difficult but needed decisions. It's a bit like taking a cookie out of the cookie jar. It's really tempting after that first delicious cookie to keep reaching in cookie after cookie. Soon, you end up like the Cookie Monster, forever tempted when you see a cookie. I've been listening quite intently to many of the alternative suggestions that have been put forward in this House over the last 2 days. And I imagine that for the Minister for Finance, it's a tremendously difficult task. From the opposite bench, many of the suggestions seem to indicate that everything can be easily funded because it's only X% of the GDP. Very easy one. Can be done. But if we take all these suggestions together, X% here, Y% there, Z% somewhere else, it adds up significantly. That's a whole lot of cookies to be given out. So right now, while there's a lot of cookies that we're eating, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of cookie making. Our honourable friends from the Workers' Party seem to say that eat away, not everything, be careful, but here's a little chocolate chip and sprinkles while you're at it. And if we run low, instead of buying the ingredients, the government should make more, yet not what is necessary to provide the ingredients to make the cookies. Our colleagues from the PSP, on the other hand, over the last 2 days, seem to indicate we should take everything from the jar, everything, including the crumbs. However, no one wants to say how much it would cost, nor be the one to be buying the ingredients.
Yes,
and bake
Mr.
the
Pritak.
cookies.
Sorry, Mr. Alex Yam. Yes, Mr. Singh.
Madam Speaker, thank you. Rules of debate, it's of course up to the member if he wants to give way. I just wanted to ask whether Mr. Alex Yam could identify which WP members made the points that he's suggesting, so that they can rebut him later on in the course of the debate.
I will come to that. But no one wants to say how much it would cost, nor be the one to buy the ingredients and bake those cookies. That big elephant in the room, of course, is GST. We cannot be constantly asking for more without being cogent of the cost. Funding from recurrent tax ensures that all that we're doing is sustainable. With GST, we have also built in buffers for the low income. Over and above that, as the Honourable Member, Mr. Saktiandi, pointed out earlier, we also amended the GST Voucher Fund Act in March 2020, just under a year ago, to cushion the impact of any GST increases for all Singaporeans, both low-income and middle-income families. With these, we also give time for incomes to catch up so that we can deal with long-term cost of living. The challenges that we face are many and varied, including an aging society that will propel increases in many areas, including, most importantly, healthcare costs. It's not just us that are facing these challenges. Hong Kong and Singapore are very similar cities with very similar traits at the end of the day. And they have just announced their budget as well, just yesterday. But despite the similarities, our budgets have taken very different trajectories. Some commentators point to a future deficit in the Hong Kong spending plan. Andy Mukherjee of Bloomberg raised the point that Singapore's plan for increase in GST is to ensure that we have enough recurring revenue to pay for permanent costs, such as healthcare. He compares these to Hong Kong and says, like Singapore, Hong Kong also has an aging population, but they don't have a sales tax and has only been able to overcome its lack of steady revenue by fanning a gigantic real estate bubble. It is certainly a scenario we will not be able to stomach locally. Yes, there's always room to do more, but raiding the cookie jar till it's empty does us no good if we fail to top it up. On the one hand, we may propose taxes, such as a carbon tax. On the other hand, by equal measure, we oppose a petrol hike, both which achieve similar goals. These seem to conflict with one another. A government, however, needs to be cognizant to the fact that there are costs to everything that we do, both in terms of our revenue streams, what more we can do for our people, and more importantly, also our popularity and our standing. The government is cognizant also to the fact that a policy like an increase in GST is unpopular, but necessary. Because ultimately, the responsibility of a responsible government is to do the right thing, even if occasionally unpopular. Populism and opportunism will, however, all but turn us into cookie monsters, always dipping into the cookie jar. I'm sure the Minister of Finance is open to many other suggestions on how we can fund these programs and yet remain sustainable as an economy and balance our fiscal position. And if there is one that works as an alternative, I'm certain it will take the biscuit. Much has been said over the last 2 days by both sides of the House. Many new suggestions, all of which will cost us. The Minister of Finance has to decide which are for the long-term good of the country and which will take us to the next mile. All of us have the good of Singapore at heart. We differ perhaps greatly on our ideas, but at the end of the day, we need to take responsible decisions to bring Singapore forward. With that, I support the motion.
Mr. Leon Pereira.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Honourable Member, Mr. Alex Yam, for his comments. Just a couple of clarifications on his cookie jar metaphor. He mentioned that when we draw upon the reserves, or when we suggest that the rules governing the use of the reserves should be changed, this is akin to sort of taking cookies from the cookie jar. I think the member is well aware that in 2008, I believe, the government itself, the PAP government, amended the rules governing the use of the reserves to create the NIR framework, and in 2015, those rules were amended again to include Temasek into that framework. Would the member, is it the member's position or argument that those were really raiding the cookie jar as well in 2008 and 2015? So that's kind of my first point. Secondly, it's really to ask the honourable member, is it the member's view that any kind of deviation away from these rules that are currently entrenched in the Constitution, in the current rules, amounts to sort of raiding the cookie jar and becoming a cookie monster, even if those rules are slowing the slope of the growth of the reserves, but do not actually draw upon and pull down the reserves, but they merely slow the growth from this sort of a slope, for example, to this sort of a slope, for example? Is that being a cookie monster? So that is my second question. My third question would be really to ask, over time, over decades, as the absolute amount of reserves relative to GDP changes, does the member not acknowledge that, these rules should also evolve and change? And as society changes and the needs of society changes and, opportunities to invest in the people in the country change, shouldn't those rules also be subject to change as well? I'd just like to invite the Honourable Member, Mr. Yam, to agree with that general philosophic point. Thank you.
Mr. Alex Yam.
Deputy Speaker, I thank the Honourable Member for his supplementary questions and clarifications. I agree, because that's what I made as a closing point in my speech. We all have the good of Singapore at heart. We may disagree with the route to get there. But on the first point, yes, as we go along, we make adjustments. We make adjustments such as introducing the NIR. But as was described earlier, we put in measures to ensure that we never empty out the cookie jar, that the cookie jar exists for moments of need such as these. And even at the current moment, where we would benefit certainly from being extraordinarily generous, we have decided on what is prudent to ensure that there is always something left over. And not only that, that where we have the opportunity to top it back up. So it's a quite different scenario from introducing changes to, rob the cookie jar. We've always ensured that we are prudent about it, that we make returns to it. As things evolved, just as it has in the past, ideas can be considered and adjustments made, but always with the view that we think about the future and not just about the now.
Ms. Rachel Ong.
Madam Speaker,
I'm grateful that this year's budget has incorporated a very sizable investment in our social capital and our environment. This in view of our long-term growth as a nation. I also wish to thank our DPM, as well as the ministries and agencies who have worked tirelessly behind the scenes all through the Chinese New Year holidays to put forward this year's budget. This year's budget allows for MSF to expand the Community Link, or ComLink program, designed to support low-income families with children from the current 1,000 families to 14,000 in the next 2 years. Thank you, I'm very inspired by that. To this topic, my speech will focus on what we can do to further invest into the lives of our children from low-income families. I wish to propose 2 initiatives for our young friends for MSF's consideration. These initiatives may not be new to some of us, but I'm convinced when applied intentionally to our young, they will strengthen their access to a fuller range of positive life choices. The first initiative is a consistent long-term mentoring program, and the second initiative is to facilitate personal saving habits. Please allow me to share on the consistent long-term mentoring program. Last month, the Telok Blangah Community Development Welfare Fund awarded bursaries to 188 children across 118 households, ranging from K2 to pre-tertiary students. While this bursary is important and helps alleviate some financial burden, it struck me that the additional funds will not change the lives of our young. Because the complexity they face today, the ever-evolving environment, each child will require deeper interventions to assess opportunities which are readily available to others. Over the past 19 years, I've had the joy of volunteering at Tribe, a social service agency that works with youth facing adversities. Our interventions to reduce offenses and the recidivism rates are multifold. But one specific intervention has proven to be most effective in turning lives around. That is long-term mentorship, mentorship that's consistent for at least a year. I believe that this intervention is not only effective for our youth at risk, but for all youth facing challenging home circumstances. May I share life stories to illustrate 3 benefits long-term mentorship provides for our young. The first benefit is a safe space to process pain. Long-term mentorship provides our young an assurance that they are not alone in the challenges they face on a daily basis. Kai, a mask name, was raised in a violent home environment. He often fought in school and found himself expelled from both secondary and tertiary schools as he could not rid himself of his aggression. Over the 2 years of mentoring, Kai was able to then reflect on the consequences of his aggression, subsequently shifting his focus to working out his life goals. As Kai's mentor created time and space for him to feel understood, Kai sought help for his anger issue and is now meaningfully engaged in work. His friends have also noticed that he's experiencing better mental well-being. In the midst of sometimes unpredictable or painful circumstances, the consistency of the mentor's presence provides a safe environment and space for our young to process their feelings and thoughts for a more productive outcome in life. The second benefit of a consistent and long-term mentorship is the ability to help our young recognize his or her innate value beyond circumstance. The strengths and passion of our children and youth can sometimes be overshadowed by family circumstance. Long-term mentorship provides an avenue to help them discover and more accurately identify what they are. Abandoned by his parents when he was 7 years old, Ken was raised by his grandfather. Due to limited supervision, he lacked motivation to do well in school and eventually fell into bad company and vice. Things started to turn around when he said yes to mentoring 4 years ago. Ken grew to discover and appreciate his personal strengths and passion. He is now looking to pursue a stable career in engineering while freelancing as a barber. What's even more wonderful is that Ken has since reconciled with his family. As our young friends discover their innate value as individuals through mentorship, they grow to become contributing members of their families, their community, and the society at large. The third benefit of long-term mentorship is the ability to break out self-limiting habits and beliefs. A volunteer at a CDAC program for low-income children once asked an 11-year-old which school she would hope to go to after PSLE. This sweet girl then said as matter-of-factly, "Oh, can pass can already." The volunteer then asked, "What do you want to do when you grow up?" Without missing a beat, she replied, "Just help my father in his store, lor." For this 11-year-old, her response came not from excitement to support and eventually take over her father's business, but as her only perceived vocational option available to her, which eventually discouraged further efforts in her education. One of the largest hindrances in the healthy development of our young people, we note, is learned disempowering beliefs about themselves and their future, due to limited access to good counsel, financial and community resources. Mentors can show them a different way to live and challenge them to remove self-limiting beliefs so that they not only have the best possibilities in life, but be motivated to choose wisely. Such intervention takes time as these beliefs are often deep-seated. I am fully persuaded that lasting, sustainable change for our disadvantaged young will take place if we invest in long-term mentoring programs for them. My hope is that through CompLink, long-term mentoring will be of easy access for our 10 to 16-year-olds to effect mindset growth and a healthier worldview. I will now move on to the second initiative aligning to CompLink for our young friends, and this will be very brief, which is to facilitate personal saving habits. In 2015, POSB reintroduced the National School Savings Campaign to great response and participation by schools. This program currently requires the parents to set up the bank account for their children and to monitor it. I wish to raise for MSF's consideration the possibility of making enrollment to this program automatic for our children in low-income families. This will also see to creating a corresponding personal savings account for them, ideally complemented by other initiatives to encourage saving. Facilitating the process or simplifying it will be of great value to the already time-stretched parents. This will jumpstart our children in the positive habits of saving and grow a sense of self-efficacy for a fruitful life. Our youth must be empowered, not be afraid to hope, and be unhindered by socio-economic backgrounds. Let us extend equitable access beyond finance and education to include social and emotional support they need. May we see every youth a success story as they author our Singapore story for the generations to come. On this note, Madam Deputy Speaker, I affirm my support for the budget.
Mr. Seah Yao Chen.
Sir, every budget is a statement of intent on our social compact. Today, I'd like to talk about how our social compact might look like as we emerge stronger together from COVID. First, on healthcare, which is a top concern for Singaporeans, especially as we get older. Indeed, healthcare costs for us as a society are escalating. This year, the operating expenditure for health is estimated to be 17.4 billion, compared to an estimated 11.7 billion last year and 10 billion in 2019. This makes healthcare the highest head of expenditure in 2021, compared to third highest in previous years, after defense and education. A big reason for this is our ongoing fight against COVID, with close to 5 billion allocated to the COVID package. And I think this 5 billion is absolutely vital ammunition for testing, tracing, and vaccination. It bears reminding that there are already 2.5 million confirmed COVID deaths around the world to date, with many more unreported. In Singapore, the toll is 29 deaths. The government has done well in managing COVID here so far, and the COVID package will give the government the means to continue keeping all of us safe in 2021. But beyond COVID, we might as well start getting used to healthcare being the highest expenditure item and start getting used to numbers like 17 billion. Because in due time, even with COVID behind us, this would be our fiscal reality. For this year, already $500 million more has been set aside for more patient subsidies as 3 polyclinics open, for the ramp-up of Woodlands campus, for recruitment of manpower into these new facilities, and for MediShield Life premium support, as well as other forms of grants and financial assistance to Singaporeans. Within our social compact, the central question for the future of healthcare is this: how and how much would we, as a people, continue to care for one another in sickness and infirmity? One of my residents' parents came to Singapore to visit before COVID and could not go back home since last year. The parent declined in health, went in and out of hospital here as a non-Singaporean, and eventually passed on. The hospital bills came up to 5 digits, even in a C-class ward. I think his experience shows vividly the real cost of healthcare and the real difference that government subsidies for Singaporeans at the outset of care makes. And so subsidies must continue to be a central feature of healthcare here in order to keep it affordable for Singaporeans. But the challenge is, how might we, as a society, keep these subsidies going for the maximum benefit of all Singaporeans? Let me make 4 points. First, we have to try and contain cost per capita. In other words, the cost to care for each Singaporean on average. This is a difficult task as ever more tests and therapies rapidly become standard in care, and so we need to continue making tough decisions on standard versus non-standard therapies and care modalities. Ultimately, we all want the best care for ourselves and our loved ones, but we need to also keep a firm eye on value and effectiveness. And this would only work if all of us as a society embrace this basic principle. Even so, I think it is inevitable that costs per capita will rise. And this is my second point. One reason is the need to duly recognize healthcare professionals for their noble and very hard work. And so while I cheered at the plans to enhance salaries in public healthcare, we need to recognize that manpower is a key driver of healthcare costs. And ultimately, any salary enhancement must mean that subsidies and other financing tools must somehow keep up. If we can all intuitively understand and support this, it will be a good example of how we as a society can continue to evolve our consensus and do what is right and fair. Now, all these in turn would mean that we need to raise more revenue. And this is my third point. Already GST will increase sooner or later, but GST fundamentally relies on a robust consumption base. And this is why I support the budget's laser-sharp focus on investing in our economy, investing in recovery from COVID, investing in industry transformation, and investing in our people. In his statement, DPM mentioned Synergy, a local startup in contactless charging. In fact, one of the co-founders of Synergy is my resident, and I could sense the absolute energy as he talks about his team and his business. For me, it is a glimpse into our economic possibilities, where Singapore is the place to create the future, creating roles for Singaporeans, and importantly, generating the means for us to better care for one another as a society. And so there is a direct link between our economic success and social objectives, and the economy must continue to be a basic parameter as we think and talk about our social compact going forward. On this note, I'd like to ask, the government projects that GST collections this year would recover 14.6% from last year to roughly 2019 levels, and corporate income tax would grow 8% compared to 2019 before COVID, and even net investment returns contribution would go up 7.8% from last year. Can the DPM clarify the basis for these projections amidst the severe economic contraction that we experienced last year? My final point on healthcare subsidies is this. In the aggregate, we must keep the growth in total subsidies to a sustainable pace, because ultimately, things do add up. This budget draws on past reserves for a second year running, and as many members have noted, eventually we want to start replenishing our reserves. And so we must be very prudent about how much our total outlay in healthcare subsidies should grow in the years ahead. Now, if costs grow faster than fiscal revenue, then healthcare subsidies might need redistribution, because ultimately the pie is finite. And some of us might get less subsidies in order that those who need this the most can continue to get the right level of support. At the same time, we should review how subsidies could also be redistributed across various settings of care, so that we can further channel care to each right setting and enhance care continuity across settings. I repeat the call I made in my maiden speech for the government to invest more deeply in intermediate and long-term care, so that we go beyond basic to dignified care for Singaporeans who need such care. Our nursing homes ought to be more home than nursing, and I believe that we as a society support such a basic direction, but more subsidies for this sector may mean less subsidies for acute and specialist care in hospitals, for example. And so these are tough choices, but choices that we as a maturing society must continue to make. In short, to secure the healthcare dimension in our future social compact, I think we need to flatten the cost curve, keep a lid on total subsidies, and within this, distribute subsidies judiciously across means and settings. And number 4, create better health and care outcomes for all Singaporeans. And 5, all this on the basis of a sound economy. We need a refreshed consensus on how we can all lean in to make this happen. So let me speak next about strengthening social service delivery for Singaporeans with less in life. We have decided fundamentally that we will not impose a cap, a ceiling on our progress as a society, that the top and the middle will continue to grow as fast and go as far as they can. So our central task, therefore, must be to do our level best to help the bottom, especially children at the bottom, to level with their peers. For every tuition class, every sport, coding, or other passion that their peers pursue because they can afford to, we have to help the young at the bottom level with their peers as much as possible. Therefore, I support the government's commitment to intervene actively and intervene more in early life. I support the additional 0.2 billion set aside for AGDA to further develop quality and affordable childcare for every Singaporean child, and I especially look forward to the expansion of Kids-Start, so that more children at the bottom can get a holistic and sustained uplift starting from early in life, even before birth. At the same time, we need to double down on holistic support for the entire family at the bottom, so that we help parents and caregivers to do well and do better, even as they continue to do their best for their children. There is a whole range of needs: housing, jobs, food, physical and mental health, with complex interdependencies, and we need to coordinate more to address these needs. And so I strongly support the planned expansion of Comlink from 1,000 families in the pilot phase to 14,000 families, and hopefully to many thousand more eventually. Just yesterday, I spoke to a CEO about corporate giving. I explained the gist of Comlink to him, and his first response was, "Oh, this is huge." So his corporate instincts told him so immediately. Indeed, this is huge. Comlink has the potential to be the platform that transforms our social service sector, the galaxy that lifts all agencies and partners up to a higher plane and pulls everyone closer together with its gravitational force. And as a society, I hope we can all help make Comlink succeed quickly. In Singapore, our approach has always been many helping hands. In fact, we need more helping hands going forward. But we also need one plan. Many helping hands, one plan. Because ultimately, it is about one family, the same lives. Ma'am, an ever fairer and more just society in Singapore should be one that keeps progressing, keeps advancing, but one where we all find it in ourselves to look back, reach out, pull fellow Singaporeans along, and on a platform, an impact multiplier that coordinates and weaves all our efforts together. I hope this social operating system can become a core capability at the whole of society level for Singapore to emerge stronger. And in this way, I think every Singaporean can have his or her shot to become the fullest version of him or herself in life. Ma'am, in Mandarin. 冠病疫情让世界、本地、个人格局都进行了大洗盘。其实我们应该看准契机，洗心革面。在医疗方面，我拱手支持提高MISI 还有医疗同僚們的薪金，但薪金成本畢竟是醫療界的重點開銷，所以政府津貼的框架如何隨之應對，我們又如何在框架內重新取捨津貼的分配，將是值得深思的問題。在扶持弱勢家庭方面，我希望社區聯繫站 Comlink 能升華為我國未來的社區服務運營平台，全面協調整合社區裡的服務資源。總結下來，我希望我國的社會契約能越演越穩固厚實，這相信也是越戰越勇，邁向疫後世界的基本含義之一。Ma'am, in Singapore, we say the best welfare is a job. In this light, a key part of our compact must also be about how we, as a society, could enable and sustain good jobs and good salaries for our lowest wage workers. And to frame this properly, I think it is not so much about reskilling and pivoting these workers to new industries, but about helping them to do better within their sectors. And to this end, I agree that the expanded progressive wage model, when conditions allow, would be a key plank. But at the same time, a big part of the basic equation here, I think, must simply be for all of us to recognize and pay more for low-wage workers' services. It is such a stark paradox, but one that bears constant reminding that as the world went into lockdown last year, that as we entered our own circuit breaker, the workers that continued going to work, the workers that could not work from home, the workers that basically kept our world going, were so often the low-wage workers providing essential services. And so, as a society, I think it is high time as COVID rages on, that we, not the government, but we, as consumers, as a people, do what is right, what is just, and show our willingness to pay a fairer level for our low-wage workers' services. Madam, let me conclude. We have an opportunity to shape the post-COVID society that we want to be. Transform our compact. Transform how we commit to caring for one another. COVID has fundamentally upended how we value things in life, reshuffled what truly matters, and redefined how we look at the world, each other, and ourselves. We must ride on COVID to emerge as a society that is ever more vested in one another's success, where those with more are ever more willing to put in their treasures, talent, and time for those with less, where the hallmark of success is to pay it forward and to help others do well and be well. In this way, we can emerge stronger together as a thriving democracy of deeds. Ma'am, I stand in firm support of this budget.
Deputy Leader.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I seek your consent to move that the debate be now adjourned?
The question is that Parliament do now adjourn.
Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that the debate be now adjourned.
Sorry. The question is that the debate do now adjourn to 12 noon tomorrow.
Tomorrow at 12 p.m. Madam.
As many as of the opinion say aye.
No.
To the contrary, say no.
One.
Yes, Leader.
Yes,
Leader.
No, correct.
I think, Madam Deputy Speaker, we need to adjourn the debate
first, and then
thereafter to adjourn Parliament.
Parliament, yes. Sorry.
Do you want me to start again?
Yeah. Yes.
I think she got it wrong. Okay. I'm waiting for Jess. Okay. Madam Deputy Speaker, may I seek your consent to move that the debate be now adjourned?
The question is that the debate be now adjourned. As many as of the opinion say aye. To the contrary, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Resumption of debate, what day?
Tomorrow, Madam, 12 p.m.
So be it.
Madam Deputy Speaker, on behalf of Leader, I beg to move that Parliament be now adjourned to 12 p.m. tomorrow.
The question is that Parliament do now adjourn to 12 p.m. tomorrow. As many as of the opinion say aye. To the contrary, say no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Order.